Salutations, everyone. Welcome back to Total Warhammer 3. I'm Lord Forwind, and here we are with a guide for the newest faction, the Chaos Dwarfs. So, the Chaos Dwarfs are, let's get this out of the way quickly, pretty well crafted by the game developers. They're kind of an odd combo between the Beastmen, Dark Elves, Skaven, Greenskins, Tomb Kings, while being dwarves. Essentially, they're evil dwarves that have turned to a chaos god, Hashut here. I don't know where they fit in the chaos lore. That's not something I know. But they're a much more industrialized nation than pretty much any other one in the game at the moment. So, we're going to jump right into this, but I'm going to put tags below and timestamps so you can jump to whatever you would like to see in the video. And I hope you enjoy it. If you do, like, comment, subscribe, all those great things. I do greatly appreciate it. And let's get going. Okay, so the Chaos Dwarves are a very industrialized faction. So their playstyle is rather different than other factions. If anything, they bear the strongest resemblance to the Dark Elves, but not entirely. They have multiple different currencies, and we'll go into all of this that they use to spend to develop. But by and large, your playstyle is going to be gaining materials, getting labor, which is essentially the slaves of the Dark Elves, which is why if you played the Dark Elves, you kind of will have an idea of what to do here. And then using that to produce both a good amount of money, but also very powerful armaments, which can be then used to upgrade your stuff. And we'll go into that more. But from what I can tell from beating 3 campaigns of this so far, as well as multiple battles, they are a rather centralized faction compared to some others. The easiest way to play them is to highly centralize around 1 or maybe 2 provinces that become your main industrial centers, and the rest mainly serve to feed you resources. And that also has to do with their settlement structure, which we'll talk about later. But by and large, you have some homelands. You want to defend those homelands very well while going outside of them to raid for essentially slave labor. There are other ways to get laborers, but we'll talk about that later on. The main goal of the Dark Elves in Total Warhammer 3 is to build this great drill of Hashut. And we can actually click on it here, and it shows where it is. Basically, there is a great drill, and they are building it, and the goal is to have it basically drill into the realm of chaos, and I don't know the lore behind it, but it sounds like to wound their actual god, Hashut, that they worship, and then use that blood to cast powerful magic and enhance themselves. Chaos Dwarves use magic, and evil magic, and it eventually petrifies them. In fact, this guy right here is entirely almost stone. He uses mechanics to get around, and they want the blood to help with that. So if you play in the Realm of Chaos mode here with all the other, not the large Immortal Empires map, your goal is to complete the drill and then win the final battle. At the end, you have to build it, complete the great drill. Interestingly enough, you only have to upgrade this unique building in your capital 1 level. You don't actually have to build it all the way to the top. Just pointing that out here. You have to get 4 ancestor relics, which we will cover later, and then you have to win a final battle. The final battle is, I think, easier than some of the Chaos Gods battles, as well as the Warriors of Chaos campaign final battle, but that's just my personal opinion, probably. Okay, now let's talk about probably the most important thing for the Chaos Dwarves, resources and their management. The Chaos Dwarves are kind of complex. In all honesty, they're almost overly complex. I see what the game creators, Creative Assembly, and their fellow creators were trying to go for. I don't know if they entirely hit it. I imagine there'll be a lot of tweaks to the numbers and setups and stuff, so in the interest of not doing a completely new guide all the time, I'm going to be slightly less certain on the exact numbers because I suspect they're going to change because right now they're a little too strong. But let's get started at the beginning here. So you have raw materials. Raw materials are probably one of the more important resources you have to deal with, because the Chaos Dwarves don't use population to develop their cities. Instead, they use both money and raw materials. So if we were to look at this guy's capital here, Kulak, you will see that there's actually an immediately upgrade, and it requires raw materials to upgrade. And that's all the way up. So if you have a large amount of raw materials, you can very quickly upgrade a settlement. Chaos Dwarves can also spend laborers to speed up the building. So if you have a massive amount of laborers and tons of raw materials, you can actually create level 5 settlements in like 5 turns. It's kind of nuts. On the other hand, the Chaos Dwarves benefit less to some degree for having highly advanced buildings, which sounds odd, but that's mainly because the Chaos Dwarves are centralized, so they have a couple high-level ones, and then outside of that, they don't really need to build up their excess settlements to super high levels. So, the next one here is armaments. Armaments are generated, as they say here, from factories, and I will give credit to whoever did the tutorials for this. They are pretty decent at explaining this, so make sure you look at them the first time you play this faction. But armaments are used, they use raw materials. Now, raw materials require labor to produce at high levels of efficiency, so you could say armaments are the combination of laborers and raw material to some degree. Factories are relatively productive. I will show you some numbers in a moment about how productive they are, but armaments are your end line. You will use them both with trading with other factions through convoys, which we'll cover later, and to upgrade your units, as well as unlock more capacity, because this game has this faction has a beastman mechanic that you're limited to certain number of good units until you upgrade it. And it's also used somewhat with technology. Okay, here we are, 57 turns into, I think this was my second campaign through, with the same guy I just showed you at the beginning. So the reason I have to go several turns in is because a lot of the mechanics in the game are locked behind 5 or 6 turns, or even behind owning 2 provinces. So let's talk about the labor here, because that's the next, and honestly, the basis of your entire economy is labor. So you have laborers. If you click on a province here, you will see under industry your labor statistics. The first one here is the amount of labor you actually have living there. How many slaves you have. Let's be honest, they're slaves. It decreases per turn. You gain it in battle. You can choose which provinces get labor here by clicking accept new labor. On the other hand, if you don't want any laborers in a province, as in the province isn't going to produce raw materials or even to some degree money, you don't have to have provinces have laborers, and I do recommend you have several provinces with no laborers, so you don't have to deal with the public order issues, which we'll talk more about later. Now, below laborers here, this is the amount that is required to get 100% of this raw material output. By the way, hover over them, they explain it very nicely. This number goes up as you build the buildings. However, if you start falling below 100 raw materials output, don't despair. Unlike the Dark Elf economy, it is not immediately disabled. It goes down as a percentage. So if you only have 90%, you get 90% of the output. So the actual almost comedy here is upgrading all your buildings all the time is worth it, because even if you have a low percent, you're getting a low percent of a higher number. It kind of works out the same. By and large, you want to try and get 2 to 3 provinces at 100% production efficiency and maintain that as long as you can. This is why I said they were more of a centralized faction. Not as centralized as, say, the Wood Elves, but definitely more centralized than something like the Empire, whose economy is spread pretty evenly beyond amongst most provinces. Now, down here is the armaments output. This is obviously, we've talked about the importance of armaments. This is really what you're after. All this work outside of the raw materials for upgrading and building buildings, your goal is to produce armaments. Now, below that, and I will hit upon it right here, labor actions. You'll notice there is no, don't tax population. That is because you always are taxing your population. The Chaos Dwarves are notoriously cruel. Even I, who don't know the lore in depth, know it very well. They're not nice people. So you instead can spend your labors to gain benefits. You have the ability to spend them to get concave influence, and we'll talk about that. It does cost 200 labors. It's really not a good exchange unless you need just a tiny bit more influence. Next one here, selling labors for money. Honestly, in 3 campaigns, never used it. Never had money problems with the Chaos Dwarves. They're almost too wealthy, and I suspect there will be nerfs to their wealth generation. Again, 200 labors. The next one here, set an example, is the one you're probably going to use the most. For 200 slaves or laborers, you will get 10 control in the province for 5 turns. You're probably going to be using that every 10 or so turns to make sure that your provinces don't revolt. We'll talk a little bit more about public order later on. I just wanted to cover that here because that is the key point to how to manage some of your resources. You want to make sure you have a large supply of labor, which you're mainly get through battles, sacking, raiding, expansion to some degree. And then you turn it into raw materials through these labor buildings here. And these labor buildings produce a large amount of raw materials at the cost of a large workload. And then you have factory settlements that with that building will turn raw materials into armaments. You'll notice if you look at the numbers, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we go over the building settlement types, which is coming up next, the ratios between them. Now, since this is a very complex economy, in your first game, don't worry too much about it. Yes, you want to be productive, but unless you're going to play on super high level, legendary, very hard modes, you can get by without an amazing in-depth knowledge of all the numbers. So I'm not going to do that. Also, those numbers are probably going to change as the developers get more information and tweak it more. By all means, hover over these buttons to get a good explanation. Now, moving labor around is a key point to the Chaos Dwarfs playstyle. If you've played the Tzeentch faction, you'll have seen similar thing, moving Winds of Magic around. This is moving labor around. Basically, this summarizes all your provinces. You can choose which ones are to get intaked from new slaves, and then you can choose if you want to do edicts. This is a much easier way of managing your empire than having to go province to province, so I really am a fan of this. It also explains your control, so I know here this province is unhappy. I could spend 200 of my laborers and get it back to something more positive control. The lower control, the more slave laborers you lose each turn. Higher, you lose less. Now, over here is labors versus workload. It's a nice, easy way to see if you've got good efficiency. It also summarizes it here. So this province is pretty inefficient. So even though I could spend slaves to get labor to get public order, it would not be necessarily a good idea. But over here, I could because I have an excess for a few turns. And it does tell you what the change per turn is, which is very nice, and then the output of raw materials. There is no detail on output of armaments, which would kind of be nice, but you can produce armaments almost anywhere, and the easiest way is to hover over that. You're going to need probably about 1.5 to 2,000 raw materials a turn surplus is what I would recommend to feel like you've actually got a lot of them. And in terms of armaments, you're going to probably want by end game, let's see, I think my first one I was about 1,500 or so armaments. So at least 10 or so factory buildings. Honestly, I didn't have enough. So start thinking about getting about 3,000 produced. Now, armaments will be spent in other ways. We'll talk about that in a minute. But you want a lot of raw materials, you want a lot of armaments, and the struggle is to really overall keep your labor surplus high. You're going to do that through battles and stuff. That's the easiest way. Fight, expand, kill people. You should almost always be at war as the Chaos Dwarfs. Nobody likes you, not really even the other Chaos Dwarfs. The dwarves in particular hate you. The normal order-abiding dwarves really hate you, so expect to come to blows with them. But it can be worth actually leaving a minor faction alive, a Skaven or Greenskins faction, and then both raiding their lands and then fighting and sacking their settlement to get the laborers rather than having to rely on constant expansion. At least in this campaign mode, it's quite easy to win with only a handful of provinces. I won the game, at least I think it was this one, with only owning this one more province and then confederating the other Chaos Dwarfs. It wasn't very hard to do. You don't have to build a mass empire to generate money. I had like 6 armies and still had a 5k surplus without even focusing. I think I built like 5 gold generating buildings. Their income is ridiculous right now. So how do we choose what our settlements are producing? Well, there are exactly 3 types of settlements for the Chaos Dwarves, and we can kind of cover them all right here in the starting area. They have these nice little icons next to them. So your large capital settlements can become towers when you occupy them. A tower is your main production building. It has access to the full range, can be upgraded to level 5, does not produce either raw materials or armaments. So this is important because all the Chaos Dwarves start with 2 settlements as a result. Otherwise, you wouldn't have any raw material income. Towers are very powerful. All the Chaos Dwarves start with a landmark in their capital settlements. They're decent buildings. You also start with the drill. You're going to want to protect them. Towers are important. They're pretty much the only way to stabilize an area and to actually generate good units. Your next settlement, when you occupy them, the game will give you a brief tutorial, but to summarize it on its own, you'll have an option for a minor settlement to build an outpost or to build a factory. The exact ratio is going to change. I just want to say this again and again to make sure it's clear to you guys. The ratio is probably going to change with the numbers over time, but your mine here, level 1 mine, is how you produce raw materials. 200 materials for 300 workload. Now, if we were to quick glance over here at a factory, at max, the factory uses 300 raw materials. So if we were to build to a level 2 mine, it will equal a single factory building. So if you want it to be optimized to some degree, level 2 mine equals 1 factory. Level 3 mine is going to give you surplus of raw materials. I recommend the ratio of about 2 outposts, which generate materials, to 1 factory settlement. Reason is you want raw materials to build an upgrade, and you do want a large surplus. Now, your minor settlements are not entirely useless. We'll go into the browser here. They can build some of your basic military buildings, your hobgoblin buildings. They can also get level 2 Chaos Dwarf buildings, and as well as getting these war machines. So you can build them to produce stuff. Their garrison is okay. It's pretty weak. You still don't have walls. So unless you've got excess money and resources, don't build outpost buildings there. But they also can produce a variety of money as well as a boost to your units, your output. And then if we were to glance quickly, and I'll do buildings later on, cover them in more depth, it's a similar thing. You've got one building here that produces raw materials. You've actually got a money building. And then over here, you've got a control building. You're going to want to build this control building a lot of places, and it's virtually the exact same type garrison. It's good, but it's not great. In fact, this garrison is, in fact, a little bit weaker than the other one, which has Chaos Dwarfs. Now, another thing to point out is the Chaos Dwarves' relation with raw resource producing buildings. They either use a ton of... let's see, did I build one here? I did. They either give you a large amount of raw materials, armaments for raw materials, or if you're lucky enough to get a gold or gem building, here's one for example, they will generate a large amount of money, similar to how the normal dwarves get a lot of money from these buildings anyway, at the cost of raw materials. So you're going to want to build 2 outposts for 1 factory, and you're going to want to build towers pretty much wherever and want to build those up and not lose the towers. Losing the minor settlements is okay because you can retake them. losing a tower really hurts because of the amount of money and raw materials you have to put into it to get it to a useful level. So let's talk a little bit more about the buildings now. We'll start here with the outpost, and then we will progress up to the towers. So your basic settlement here for the outpost has a decent garrison, produces some good money, gives you conclave influence, which we'll cover later, but is very important to have. And it has a very limited pool of buildings you can build. You can build only hobgoblins in an outpost. In a factory, you can build Chaos Dwarfs. So there's a slight difference there. Hobgoblins are decent melee units for the Chaos Dwarfs. You're going to be using a lot of them mid to early game, or early to mid game. Then you've got your mine. Pretty much, this is going to be built in any settlement that you have labor and you're going to want to produce raw materials in. If you are not putting labor in the province, don't build these buildings. Just build their other buildings and use it as more of an occupation force than an actual resource producing one. You're only going to be able to really support 3 or 4 regions to a large degree. Then over here, you've got a great little money building. It's not too expensive to build, generates decent money. And once you get these technology extended shifts, it gives you more money. The big benefit here is income from post-battle loot. Again, showing the Chaos Dwarves are kind of almost defensively centralized. They do very well at making money when enemies invade them. And in fact, a lot of their buildings are focused towards defense rather than offense, which is kind of interesting. This last one here is a watchtower. You're going to want to build this in most of your mono settlements. Chaos Dwarves have public order problems, so having additional control +3 in a region is very useful. If you have 2 outposts, that's +6, which helps a ton. Prevents you from needing to issue those slave edicts more often, or labor edicts. Garrisons, not worth building unless you've got a spare slot, which if you're not producing raw materials, you'll probably have a spare slot in your settlement because you'll be doing money and then public order, and then you can do a garrison. The settlement won't generate much money, but it will help you with their staging and defend against enemy incursions. Don't expect your garrison to stop enemy invasions. It's a weak garrison. A full stack will by and large wreck it, but it will do some damage. And the last building here, of course, is signal fires. The Chaos Dwarves are chaotic, undivided, so they have trouble with other chaos, monogod chaos corruption, as well as all the other types of corruption. They don't do particularly a great job of spreading their own corruption, which is they need really high level buildings to do it. So this signal fire might actually be something you build in settlements that border, say, someone like the vampire counts, who are very prone to spreading their corruption to neighboring provinces, just to control it. Also helps controlling plague. For some reason, the Chaos Dwarves seem to have a bit more issue with plague than other factions in my couple of playthroughs. They can reduce the spread of a plague really low with this building and a tech to like 75%, which helps a lot. And of course, if you got Skaven Undercities, that's good. But a +5 chaos corruption building, when you research pandemic preparations, is pretty much all the corruption spreading you'll need, because your base buildings also spread it as well. So on to a factory. So you'll notice a wider range of buildings. You've got your settlement building, which is virtually the same. In this case, I've got a conclave seat that gives me more conclave influence, but it generates 1 normally. Slightly better garrison with the garrison line buildings here. You can get all the way up. Chaos Dwarves and blunderbusses hits a little bit harder than the goblin ones. On the other hand, losing a factory settlement's a little bit more precious than losing an outpost settlement. So it would be tempting to put these on the front lines, but the reality is you want to protect your factories. It's much easier to lose and regain outposts, whose really only purpose is producing raw materials, which you should be producing a large surplus of. So go with the other settlement on your front line. Protect these a little bit more. They're still a relatively useless settlement, though, to you. Again, a similar chaos spreading building. Don't put this in your factories, though. Put it in your outposts, which have less buildings you can build anyway, or rather useful ones. So right here, you've got your factory, your assembly line. First one, 150 raw materials. If you were to consider the level 1 mine here, it produces 200. Level 2 produces 300. If you were to do it that way, one mine could produce 2 level 1 assembly lines, but the reality is that this is not a complete doubling. See, it goes from 50 armaments to 100, but the cost does not go from 150 to 300, it's 150 to 255, meaning less factories, more higher level ones. Again, here it only went up 75, but gave us 50 more armaments. As it gets more efficient, it uses less raw materials to make armaments. The next one here is a building that honestly I didn't need at all in my campaign, but if you want extra money, here you go. You use raw materials, you produce a very hefty amount of gold. One of these, you have 2 or 3 of these, they support almost an army on their own. But the reality is money is not the problem for Chaos Gods to produce, Chaos Dwarves to produce good armies. It's more armaments. So you're actually going to probably need more assembly lines than money buildings. And the last one here is a very, very important building if you want to play the Chaos Dwarves well. This is just a flat raw materials output in the local province. So in this case, I've got 2 mines, right? But then this is 400 times 30%, or plus 30% to the output. This is really how you can get more productivity out of your more developed and centralized provinces than you would expect. It's also free. It feels a little weird that it does no cost to upkeep, so take advantage of it before I imagine they put an upkeep cost on it. And then in terms of your military, you can do hobgoblins. I really wouldn't build it in factories because you can build it in outposts, but you can also build the Chaos Dwarf line. First one, you get your basic Chaos Dwarves. You even get ones with guns, which is kind of nice compared to the normal dwarf factions. Then the next one, you get Infernal Guards. Infernal Guards, you're going to be wanting to use as your main, to a large degree, line of dwarf infantry. Just they're at the sweet spot between cost and combat ability for most of the game. And then up at the top, you can't build this in your minor ones, but this will get you Infernal Ironsworn, which are much better. Obviously can only be built in your capital tower settlements. But thankfully in your factory, you can also produce war machines. You'll notice here, war machines require armaments to build the building. This is why you need a large surplus of armaments to just even construct good buildings. Thankfully, you don't need it for your basic military, but advanced you definitely do. Also, the very nice thing here of global recruitment duration reduction allows you to build this in a minor settlement and then use global recruitment to reinforce your army rather than having to build up a whole new industry. The Chaos Dwarves rely on their global recruitment ability, that is a recruitment from any settlement in the world to an army, although it is like twice as expensive and usually takes longer to actually maintain their armies on the offense rather than building up new settlements as they go. If the Chaos Dwarves get these type buildings built and they have got a good economy, they are quite hard to stop steamrolling across the map. And of course, they use steam engines, so it's more accurate than you'd imagine. Very useful. I build it more for the global recruitment duration than anything else, but the ability to produce reasonably good artillery is good. The armament cost is steep, though, so don't throw this down everywhere. 1 per region at most. By and large, you're going to put it on your front lines. So that is the 2 minor settlements, factories, and outposts. If we jump over to a tower settlement, you'll notice huge amount more buildings. So this one required... Oh, wait, I did forget one other thing. Sorry, let me double check. I can show you that. Right here. To upgrade a factory building requires raw materials. To upgrade an outpost is simply money. This is a raw material upgrade. So this is why you need raw materials. You need raw materials for the factory, but you also need to use in the factory once you've built it. The same thing here occurs in your tower settlements. They require a large amount of raw materials to build. They provide a decent garrison as well as undivided and recruitment capacity. Chaos Dwarves can produce a surprisingly large amount of troops in their lands, which is quite nice for a warmongering species. Kind of feels a little strong at the moment. So you've got your landmarks because this is a capital one, so we'll just kind of skip over those. I will note that the landmarks in the Chaos Dwarf capital settlements, this one in particular, provides a garrison. They also do allow basic recruitment of Chaos Dwarf units. So in your first settlement here, you don't necessarily have to build a Chaos Dwarf infantry line building unless you want access to the high-level Chaos Dwarves buildings or units through the buildings. You'll probably not have to build this in your starting settlement until some distance in the game. So I just want to tell you, it's a bit of a trap to build a Chaos Dwarf recruitment building in your capital because you can already produce the basic Chaos Dwarves anyway. At least for the first 10, 15 turns. This is a resource building. I kind of mentioned it earlier, but it bears mentioning again. There's about 4 types of Chaos Dwarf resource buildings that I found. There's this one here, which is for raw materials, produce a large amount of armaments for raw materials per turn. It's a better ratio than your factory, which is kind of nice. And if you get stockpiling tech, it goes up even more. So if you put this in a settlement that also has a factory in it, you can get a crazy output. If you were to make an entire region of just factories, along with one almost entirely of outposts, you could produce a stupid amount of armaments as well as a stupid amount of raw materials in the other province. I will point out that you can make your capital settlements outposts or factories, so you can make an entire region of just one type of building, one type of settlement. I never do it. I find the towers worth way more than having extra production. The other type of raw resource one, I showed you the gems. It's similar for golds. If I remember, it doesn't cost raw materials though. Then you have the upkeep one. So if I were to, let's see, here we go. Here's one. I didn't build it here. This one here is your upkeep cost, recruitment cost, and then finally an upkeep cost faction-wide for a set amount of units. And there is another one, which I don't actually have to show you at the moment, which is just produce some trading resources. By and large, the Chaos Dwarfs struggle getting trading goods. So just be aware that your trade empires are not that amazing as the Chaos Dwarfs. Oops. Okay, here we go. The next thing to look at is the basic military. Obviously, hobgoblins. Don't put it in a major settlement. It's really not worth it. Put it in your minor settlements, considering it only goes up to 2. You're going to want at least 1 Chaos Dwarf barracks fully upgraded in a tower settlement somewhere in the world, because then you can do global recruitment from them. Remember, you've got money to spare usually as the Chaos Dwarfs, so global recruitment is not as painful for you as other factions. The next one here is your advanced military. Now, this is where things get a little bit trickier. I'll go over the units later, but in terms of the buildings, you have a different lines. You've got your beast line here, and unlike some other factions, the Chaos Dwarves have really good beast units at the moment. It also kind of doubles as like a temple thing because it spreads chaos corruption to its own province and neighboring ones. So it's usually worth throwing down, especially on your border with, say, the vampires. Also unlocks more units. The next one here is your war machines. Remember, you can get up to level 2 in minor settlements, but the level 3 here really shines with manufacturing complex. This is a great building, reduces the global recruitment. Some of these war machines take 6 turns to recruit. You can reduce it by 4, 3 from this building, and I think 1 from tech. Plus the global recruitment capacity. If you build this enough places, you could recruit a full army globally in like 3 to 4 turns. It's amazing. I only did it once, but it felt great. The next one over here is your Kadai units, which is basically demonic armor as well as your magic users. The Kadai Fireborn is a decent unit. We'll talk more about it later, but by and large, the increased research rate for the Chaos Dwarves is kind of handy, but more importantly, the access to all their magic users is really nice. Chaos Dwarves actually are decent at magic. Who'd have thought? The next one here is infrastructure, and I'm actually going to work my way back on this one. So the first building here, level 5, the Temple of Hashut, is one of the most important buildings you will ever build in this faction because of the Conclave influence gained. This will allow you to take over the Conclave more than you were before you built this. Winds of Magic is nice. Diplomatic relations with Chaos Dwarfs is really handy. The recruit rank for Bull Centaurs is really strong. Bull Centaurs are good units. Right here, it unlocks your hero. So having higher level heroes, always good. And then if you research Hush It Reverence, you gain even more Conclave influence. You're going to probably want to build 1 or 2 of these so you can confederate the other Chaos Dwarfs. We'll get to Conclave, I promise, and it'll make a lot more sense then. The next one here is a furnace. Raw materials consumed per turn by buildings. Really what this does is it reduces the raw materials used in your factories. So having this in a tower settlement in a region with a factory is very useful. Remember when I said this faction was complex? Did you believe me then? Hopefully you're believing me a little bit now. It's a little confusing your first time, but don't worry, it's pretty straightforward. And once you get the hang of it, it comes across as relatively simple to understand, if not simple to optimize. The next one here is your patrol routes. This is kind of a public order building, and you're going to want to build this pretty much in every tower settlement. The big thing here, the control is great, but also the movement range allows your troops to really race through your lands, which as a defensive faction is really nice. Further enhanced, more movement range as well as reduced upkeep, meaning you can support those amazingly advanced chaos armies in your region. It's important to note it's a money upkeep reduction. I believe it does not affect armaments from what I could tell. And if you upgrade it all the way, it spreads control to your neighboring provinces, as well as providing 5 to your local regions. So that could be 5 from buildings here, 3 from each you build in the minor settlements. You can get a lot of public order bonuses, which you need, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But the control to adjacent provinces is nice. If you play nice and centralized 2-3 regions, they can support each other, prevent revolts. Movement range obviously gets larger. Sadly, the upkeep reduction does not. And then the final one here, and this is kind of an interesting one. This is basically your temple building, kind of, but it doesn't spread chaos corruption. That's over here in the lava fields with the beasts. Instead, this one provides recruitment rank in the region as well as replenishment. Again, doubling down on the defensive nature of the Chaos Dwarves. They're really hard to kill on defense because they get plus 10 casualty replenishment, as well as if you upgrade it fully, recruitment rank goes up faction-wide. So if you got somehow 10 of these, you could be recruiting both Immortal, Lords, and Heroes anywhere on the map. I will point out level 3 here, the Hero recruitment rank becomes faction-wide, but the Lord is only local until level 4. So it goes 1-1 in the area, then 2-2 in the same province, and then Heroes faction-wide, and then Lords faction-wide. And the casualty replenishment rate goes up as you build the building. It's worth throwing down in any area you're going to be fighting in. If you get it to level 4, great, benefits are good, but the casualty replenishment rate is quite nice on defense, really helps towards the end games, I will point out. And the final row here is your defense. Again, you've got the signal fires. Don't build this in a capital settlement unless you really need to. Stick it in your minor settlements. Then you've got your garrison line here, and their garrison is pretty decent. You get a strong dwarf, you get reduced attrition while under siege, which is quite nice. With that combined with your movement speed, you can easily have a settlement under siege. And then if you've built a lot of patrol routes everywhere here, rail network, your armies race across the map to liberate it. So you can actually get by with surviving sieges more than you'd expect. It's worth building, especially in your towers, which hurt to lose. Throw it in your capital so no one snipes your main resource and factory area. It won't stop a full army, but it's pretty good. And then right here is, if you were confused about the Chaos Dwarfs being defensive, let this solve your mind. This is basically a giant mortar tower, and it slows down enemies' progress in your lands, which gives you more time to respond to incursions, as well as gives you an army ability to basically fire. Well, it fires a variety of different shots, but some are giant, like almost like bombs they drop from the air. Others are gun volleys. You get a lot of defensive army abilities, which I think I killed about 800 or so units using the defensive abilities in the final battle. So Don't underestimate it. And more importantly, it applies to local and adjacent regions. So this means combining it with the rail network, which spreads control. This spreads a defensive one. If you throw a garrison, your faction's territory can be highly defensive, highly fast on your movement, and you get a lot of army abilities in your defensive battles. Surprisingly, I think the Chaos Dwarfs might be the most defensive faction now. Compared to the Wood Elves, who are all about, attrition and hard to get to, the Chaos Dwarves make you pay once you get there, which takes longer. I really wish the creators would take a leaf out of their Chaos Dwarf design here and do the reduced movement range and apply that to the Wood Elves buildings. It would make them a lot better. Hopefully this is a good sign that will come along later on. So anyway, that's by and large all the buildings the faction has. And remember, 2 mines for the factory, and then use the towers as well to get access to all this powerful stuff. You want to stack these tower ballistas and public order control bonuses wherever you can. And expanding region by region rather than just settlement by settlement is definitely the way to go with the Chaos Dwarfs. They don't do particularly well with single settlements in a region. They really need the whole region for it to be productive. On the other hand, it means you can sell that region to other people and make lots of money if you can't take the rest of the region. So let's cover something that I'm sure you're wondering some about: armaments more. So obviously we know how to produce them. So what do we use them for? Okay. Let's get even more complex. So the first thing you will use them for is the Hellforge. So if you've played the Beastman, you'll recognize the screen almost instantly. It's almost a recreated Beastman screen to a large degree. It basically is your unit caps. So at the start of the game, I think you only have 2 warriors you can get. So obviously understand that these have been upgraded. You have to spend armaments to gain capacity. So if I want another warrior, I have to spend a good chunk of my armaments on it. And as you can see, the cost goes up. As I upgrade it, though, it does unlock various enhancements to the units as that goes along. You can get some free capacity expansions, but by and large, you're going to be generating a massive amount of armaments. This is where having 1,000+ armaments a turn comes in really handy, because these costs skyrocket really fast, and trying to maintain a full army of Chaos Dwarves, War Machines, and Bull Centaurs, and all these other ones, is really hard to do. At the start, you only have access to like 4 Chaos Dwarf units until you start doing upgrades, so you have to rely on Hobgoblins at that point. Chaos Dwarves are a faction that does better the longer the game goes on, so long as their economy is good, because then they get better armies. Sadly, you don't get the free upkeep of Beastmen. I know, it would be amazing, but you don't. Now, when you unlock a level upgrade here, if you then click on the other tab, the Manufactory, which, by the way, the tutorial for this is pretty good. It does miss one thing, though. You will have access to all the different forges. I love the effect of the pipes up above. So if we were to click on Melee Infantry, it tells us what units we have, what the upkeep, how many of each we have. Here is all the various different forge crafts. Obviously, we've expanded on them. If we were to click here on the missiles, you'll see we haven't enhanced our units with them. At the start, I believe you can only get 3 enhancements to your units. You can later get that to 5 through technology. Now, each upkeep forgecraft thing requires a certain amount of armaments per unit. It's not just globally it costs 10 armaments. No, it in fact costs 10 plus 8 plus 8 per unit. So it tells you how many units and it multiplies it. So I'm spending 312 armaments a turn on these enhancements for my units. And this means towards the late game, if you really want to improve your units, the cost for armaments skyrockets. It was very common for me to do an enhancement and then realize, oh, I just crashed my entire armaments industry. So just be aware of what you do. Obviously, the cheaper ones here, you're going to want to throw at least one on pretty early on. You get this great one at the beginning, Frenzy, which is a nice just boost to your Chaos Dwarves. You get it really early. It's worth throwing on. Some of these other ones, Charge Reflection, you want to use it if you fight, say, Bretonia or someone who has a large amount of large units. Some of these other ones, you can customize it, is my point. Spell resistance, great if you're fighting spellcasters. Otherwise, not as much. If you're fighting demons, contact effects, sundering attacks is going to be your biggest and most useful thing when it comes to fighting other dwarven factions or heavily armored ones. Don't underestimate the combo of sundering, physical resistance, and glittering scales. You can be resistant, reduce the enemy armor, and reduce their combat ability. The Chaos Dwarves have an army for every faction and every situation if you have time to prepare for it. Thankfully, you usually do. There's, I think, a 3-turn cooldown period. And do remember, though, if you pick an enhancement, you do have to hit apply. Even if it shows up here, it is not fully done until you hit apply. The only thing the tutorial misses, and it fooled me for a while, I keep thinking I've applied an enhancement, but I haven't actually until you hit apply. And it's locked for 3 turns. So obviously there are various different enhancements. Some of the cool stuff here for the missile units is that you can get extra powder and you can also do extra reload. So you can get more ammo for your ranged units. The additional stuff is really kind of cool. Suppressive fire is great, especially because you've got gun units, which kind of the enemy is charging towards them. Reducing the enemy speed at which they advance allows you to get more shots off. Stock is really nice if you want to do flanks, but the Chaos Dwarves don't need it as much. The magic attacks, remember that magic negates armor. Obviously, the dwarves have magic resistance, but if you're fighting someone like the Empire, having magic attacks to negate the armor or the Chaos factions can be very handy. Flying monsters here, some of these are really cool. Strength from Flesh is arguably one of the best ones. Regeneration is amazing. You can get a barrier as well, which is kind of cool, as well as charge. Flying monsters are really good if used properly. I found I liked the bull centaurs more, but that was me. Kadai here, again, this is your demonic unit. The fact you can get unbreakable as well as something like Forge Fire, you can customize your army to fight anybody. So definitely explore these options. I'm not going to go through each one, but stuff like Unbreakable as well as Forge Fire and Devastating Flanker are all really good. War Machines gets interesting here. Extra reload should never be underestimated, but in my experience, the Chaos Dwarves very rarely run out of ammunition on their War Machines, except during really long battles. But stuff like plus ammunition, the Hellbound is kind of cool. Again, armor negation, perfect vigor, physical resistance. Their War Machines can actually fight a little bit, but don't worry about it. Barrier is quite nice. It allows you to trade with enemy War Machines, since the barrier kind of regenerates a little bit if they miss even one shot, which is cool. You really shouldn't put them in the melee if you can help it. So some of these are less useful. However, the Bull Centaurs here, I am going to actually talk about these guys more, but they're really strong. Stuff like Murderous Charge applied to them is really powerful, as well as regeneration and Blood Greed here. Basically, the more they're in the fighting, the stronger they are. If you need them for flanking, it's great. These guys solve the problem the original dwarves have with not having cavalry. In fact, they're better in some ways than the Bretonian Knights, which is fun. So anyway, your armory, you need the armaments to improve them. Then once you've unlocked the improvement, you go to the manufactory and you apply them. It's very easy to expand the armory quickly and get the enhancements, but actually using the enhancements in your manufactory will crash your armament industry. So just keep in mind, you may want to delay putting enhancements on for 20 or 30 turns of production just so you can get your capacities up. You really only need the enhancements when you're fighting an enemy your base units can't beat, or you're getting towards the late game armies, in which case the enhancements are great. You may want to turn them on and then turn them off periodically. Remember that 3-turn waiting period, though. Turning them off is great because then it allows you to get more capacity, or armaments to improve your capacity, I should say. So again, reactive, 3 turns. The application of the change happens on the next turn, but it takes 2 more turns after that before you can turn it off. So now we're going to get a little bit more into specific little things about the Chaos Dwarfs. We've covered the vast majority, and so if this is all you see of the video, you've gotten most of it. The next stuff are more subtle. So the Chaos Dwarfs have a public order problem. They probably have the worst public order problem of any faction other than someone like the vampires without any vampiric corruption. As their labor population gets larger and larger in an area from battles and stuff, your public order drops. Sadly, there's no way to really refuse getting labor captives after a battle. So if you're fighting lots of battles, this can be a growing problem for you. So keep an eye on it. Thankfully, the higher public order you get, the less labor you use. The less public order, the faster the labor dies off, which means it can kind of self-adjust to the public order problem. But it's not uncommon to face labor revolts, which is fine because you crush them and you get laborers. So think of it that way. However, if you are like me, don't like having to constantly recall your lands to fight public rebellions every 5 to 10 turns, there are some ways to get around it. And I've already discussed them all, but I'll summarize them again here. So you have watchtowers in your outposts that give +3 control. If you do what I do here with 2 outposts, that's +6, which helps quite a bit. If you, in your capital, throw down these tower patrols, which you should do, is, well, initially it's +1, but at the end it's +5, as well as the spread to adjacent provinces. If you, in your adjacent province, start building it as well, and you get that up, they can share. I think I managed to stack +8. You could probably get higher. Regardless, if you do that, it really helps with the public order. The other way you can get around it is using your various edicts. So there is an edict here, +2 control, which is nice early on. In fact, unless you're recruiting units early on, you're probably going to want to throw this on because public order early on is a problem. It also reduces plague spreading, which combined with the Skaven detection building is a negative 75% reduction in plague spread. Helpful if you fight Nurgle, just saying, or even the Skaven. The next one here is honestly kind of broken. Negative 20 recruitment cost, +2 recruitment rank of your armies. I already said the Chaos Dwarfs have good armies. This just is a little nuts. I suspect it's going to be nerfed. It allows you to get really powerful units really quickly. Really, it's really strong. I'm not kidding. Put this in the area you're going to recruit units. Turn it off when you're not. Put it on the control if you've got nothing else to do. The next one here, Masterful Architects. Rush labor. I mentioned it earlier, but I'll show you here. If we look here, 10 turns, rush construction costs 1,000 slaves, 100 per turn. To construct the building, it would build it instantly. It's nice. On the other hand, the cost of the slaves can get really excessive. So unless you've got tons of them, don't rush construction that much. But the ability here reduces it by 10, so rather than 1,000, be 900. It helps a little bit. Construction cost, I wouldn't worry about this too much. It helps, and you should probably turn it on before you start major upgrades. Their outpost buildings, which upgrade through gold, are expensive. It's like 4,000 for a level 2 upgrade, 7,500 for a level 3. So reducing that by 750 helps a decent amount. And then finally down here, you've got income from refinery. Remember, your refinery is only your factory building that spends raw material to get gold. But the armaments output is quite nice. Especially in your capital area, whose drill building actually fully upgraded produces armaments and raw materials. It's kind of cool. So put that wherever you're producing lots of armaments or you're using refineries. Otherwise, by and large, you're going to be on control unless you're producing an army. Really, the architects is the least useful of them all. But if you combine all the public order buildings, you can have +6 from 2 minor ones. You could have +5 control, +2 from neighboring ones. You can get like +20 public order. And you need it. Because as soon as you march your army out and start winning battles, slave labor starts getting unhappy and causing revolts. So this is a very key concept of public order management unless you want to squash the revolts. If you want to squash the revolts, remember it is money, it is experience, and it is more laborers after you win the battle. On the other hand, it is time. That you give up time and stability in the province, as well as a good amount of laborers if it revolts. It does not, crushing the revolt does not make up from the labor loss leading up to the revolt unless your public order is nuts. Plus the recruitment cost goes up. So by and large, you want to prevent the revolt. You could theoretically create a region that is basically custom for slave revolts and farm them there. But I don't think it's worth it. Instead, keep your lands happy and get your slave laborers from conquering other people. It's much easier that way. So let's talk about the tower mechanic. So the Tower of Zar, by the way, for those of you who are curious, Zar is Zar Nagrund right here, which is an independent Chaos Dwarf faction that's really powerful and it's probably not going to fall to AIs. Basically, you can confederate it later, but the unique mechanic for the Chaos Dwarves is that you can take various seats on the Conclave, which give you various enhancements, as well as fight the other Chaos Dwarves for them. I'll explain that. The game does a decent job, but I'll cover it again. So each seat gives a benefit. These ones cost initially 75 influence. You get influence through settlement buildings, temples, which is why the temple building that gives 5 per turn is 10 per turn is very strong. Missions, labor actions, and events. You can get it from labor actions. It's really not worth it. Anyway, each seat costs a minimum value to take, but then if you want to take it from another Chaos Dwarf faction, there is a delay, and the cost goes up the more times the seat is stolen. As you can see, I'm black, so I own a decent amount. There are some seats that are more valuable than others, so I'm actually going to go through and talk about them. So the first one here I recommend, if you can, is this one. Casualty replenishment rate +6. You usually will beat the AI to this one. The reason you want to grab this is casualty replenishment is really important for keeping an offense going. Your lords get casualty replenishment early on through their blue line. This makes it even stronger. Combined with a hero, you can basically restore your army every 2 to 3 turns later on, but 6% early on is no joke. So definitely snag it pretty early on. The next one below this, random magic or talisman ancillary every 3 turns. You don't get these normally, really, except you get them through battles. I almost have none because I never owned this seat, despite playing several campaigns. Can be very useful if you want to enhance your lords. The next one here, armaments cost. If you're doing a lot of unit capacity upgrades in the Hellforge, 10% cheaper is great. The ideal method is to gather huge amounts of armaments, seize this seat as well as others, and then do all the enhancements in one turn rather than piecemeal. Down here, Winds of Magic Power Reserve +2 per turn. It's no joke. This allows your armies to have max magic almost every battle. Only take the seat, though, if you're having magic users in your armies. Other than that, doesn't really help. This one is an army ability, Army of Contempt, huge armor boost, melee defense for 26 seconds, as well as immune to psychology. Good for your army at the first charge, or if you're fighting somebody like the like a demonic faction that reduces leadership or causes routing and stuff. Next one below it, movement range +15 after winning a battle. Yes, they took this from Valkyra. They stuck it here. It's quite nice. You win a battle, you can move further. If you win an ambush battle, it doesn't really apply, but still. +15 movement range helps you sustain your offense. Next one, armaments, 25 per turn, armaments output +5. If you were to snag one in this column first, you want to snag this. Armaments, especially early game, are expensive to come by. The longer you own this, the bigger benefit you get, the more enhanced your units can become later on, and the greater capacity. It's a great one to snag. The only reason I wouldn't take this over the casualty replenishment is early on, usually you want to conquer more lands. rather than gaining a resource. Casualty replenishment is early on better. Later on, this is stronger. And then finally, random weapon or armor ancillary. You don't really get many of these otherwise, so if you want to improve your lords and heroes, you need to do this. Remember, legendary lords have their own unique items, so it's less pressing when you only have one army, but once you get more than one army, you may want to take that seat. And then over here, we've got raw materials plus 100, raw materials output overall plus 5. Great once you start needing raw materials, probably the third strongest at this whole level of the towers. It's also great for later on, the 5%. It's not game breaking, but certainly helps. Over here, you've got income from settlement buildings. I never needed this, mainly because you make a lot of money as the Chaos Dwarfs. If you have money problems, get this seat. It will help. Next one, random follower banner. Again, if you want to enhance your lords and heroes, you kind of need this. Less pressing than some of the others. And then trade, relations, income from trade. You don't get a lot of trade because you don't have a lot of raw materials. Most of your raw material production is instead trued up with generating more money or generating more raw materials or reducing upkeep than actually giving you trade goods. On the other hand, the diplomatic relations with Warrior Chaos, Norska, and Chaos Dwarves is nice because it pretty much prevents them from attacking you. So before we move up to the next tier, these are districts, obviously in each column. Once a full district is complete, all the Chaos Dwarves receive the benefit. So everyone's getting 10 research, wall breaches, raw materials, and armaments output. This is nice because you can kind of work together with the other Chaos Dwarves to get a benefit. On the other hand, they tend to steal your seats a lot. It's annoying. But you can always get them back. There's, I think, like a 4 or 5 turns before you can retake them. Up here, level 2, things start to get obviously less seats, but the benefits are strong. I thought the level 1 benefits are overall the best up until level 4. So, starting in sorcery, summon Kadai Fireborn in battle. Really good army ability. Army abilities are free to use in the battle. It's nice and strong. Kadai Fireborns are solid units that can do some decent damage. Beneath it, a unit capacity every 4 turns. This will save you a ton of armaments in the long run. Obviously, it randomly applies to bull centaurs, Kadai are flying monsters, but it saves you between 100 and 500 armaments every 4 turns in an enhancement. Be aware that it does increase the cost from what I can see. The next one here, another army ability. This is a pretty good bombardment one. So if you take these 2, that's 2 free army abilities. If you take all of them, obviously you get more capacity. I think the capacity is the strongest one there. It's less useful in battle, which if you're in a desperate war, you're going to need. But if you don't need the army ability, this one is stronger in the long run. Military district, melee infantry and missile infantry. You want more Chaos Dwarves? This is how you're going to get them. Saves you tons of armaments. Next one here, a huge bombardment ability. This thing is strong. This is what you get from building those mortars buildings in your tower settlements. You basically get one of these. This gives you one regardless. It's pretty strong. It can wipe out full units. It's not as strong as the Skaven Nuke, but it's about 2 steps below that. It's stronger than most other spells. Then this is another army ability. It gives you basically a short volley of guns. Not really strong, probably the weakest in this line. But still, it kills things for free. Over here, industry districts, 1 turn reducement in all your building times is nice. Really though, if this is not as powerful as it sounds unless you have tons of raw materials and money, because you're going to be more gated by having raw materials to build up settlements and obviously money than you will be by time, because you can always spend laborers to skip the time. So it's kind of a little bit of a trap. It's not bad, but it's not as strong as you think it is. This one, on the other hand, +1 concave influence for each factory settlement buildings. So what this means is if you build a factory, you'll get +1 from the settlement building, not from the other buildings built in that settlement. So it's not as strong as it sounds, but still, +1 influence will help you gain more seats. Probably the strongest one on this entire tier because of it. And then over here, convoy capacity, still got to talk about convoys, and level 5 recruitment rank for convoy overseers is nice. Are honestly probably the weakest one on the entire level. On to tier 3. Oh, wait, I should mention we get Chaos Undivided, which is nice. Remember, you're going to get all these because the AIs will buy some of these too. The global recruitment capacity is nuts. Convoy is nice. Level 3. Now we're starting to get into other stuff. In order for a tier to be unlocked, though, on any tier, you have to build 2 districts up. So once we build up the second tier 2 down here, we'll unlock tier 3. Just to point that out. So we got Winds of Magic capacity up for each sorcery seat. So every seat you own in this left-hand district column, you'll get additional reserved. Could be strong if you're going hard into magic. Doom of Hashut is even stronger than the other bombardment ability we got down here. Very powerful, quite capable of wiping an army if you've got it grouped up. This starts to approach Skaven nuke level. Starts to. Skaven nukes are broken. Over here, temporary army of hobgoblins when you sack a settlement. Honestly, I haven't used it, mainly because hobgoblin armies, although decent, are not as strong as your dwarf armies. It may require upkeep of that army. I'm not sure. It's fun if you're on offense. It allows you to kind of snowball your offense a bit more. Be aware it does have a 5-turn cooldown, so by the time you use that army to take another settlement, your offensive had to have slowed by 5 turns. Reduced upkeep for every military seat. Again, this is the military column. Is nice if you want to save money. Otherwise, you really don't have money problems with the Chaos Dwarfs. Over here, construction cost reduction for every industry seat. This can be very powerful, save you resources and other stuff if you've got a lot of seats. Otherwise, less useful. And then over here, workload requirement for raw materials reduction by 5%, as well as raw material consumed per turn. So again, requiring less labor and requiring less raw materials in your factories to produce armaments. Probably the strongest on this level, followed by the Black Artificer army ability. +3 control per provinces, though. Once you get this, if you've been playing building public order buildings, at this point, all revolts will pretty much definitely cease, which is great. Global recruitment duration reduced again. Might even get you even further in terms of global recruitment. We'll look at that when we cover technology. Reduction in spell cost. Finally, the highest level of the tower. Awesome bullhorn here. This allows you to confederate the other Chaos Dwarf factions. Obviously, it changes based off what faction you play. Get the other 2 AI factions before you get the Servants of the Conclave. Servants of the Conclave won't take seats or really expand. They're passive. I think the Black Pyramid of Gash faction, whereas these other 2 will take seats and stuff. Pretty sure the AI can't take these, but once you take over a faction, obviously you confederate them, you get all their lands and everything. You receive a penalty to public order, but you don't receive a lock on confederation, meaning if you save up enough influence, you can confederate a lot of Chaos Dwarf factions rather quickly. Nicely, you get all their seats. So at the end, you will get all these benefits on your own. It's pretty nuts. As you can see, all the benefits I'm getting here. By the end game, it's crazy. And that's the tower. You want to progress up the tower as fast as you can, especially if you want to do confederations. If you progress slowly, the AI will keep stealing your seats. This is probably the only faction where confederating your rivals actually provides a bigger benefit than their land and troops because you get all the towers. I will point out the fact that the AI is pretty bad at building their armies, and they do enhance their dwarves. So when you take over, expect your armament costs to skyrocket, which can crash your economy if you're not careful. The Servants of the Conclave have 2-stack armies in a very high-level capital with pretty strong Grand Temple here. So technically you could take this first because it will help you get the others faster. I'd take it last just because these guys do nothing anyway. Once you get this, the benefits are crazy. You'll get 2 free armies, a really powerful city, tons of enhancements, and you'll have most of the tower at that point. The world's your oyster. You can rampage across the world pretty easily, even in Immortal Empires. Okay, we're through the bulk of this guide. If you've watched this all in one sitting, good for you. We're going to be talking about Convoys. This is another mechanic which is taken pretty much straight out of Cathay, even though I didn't really mention at the beginning as one of the inspirations. It's still using the same mechanic. You create a convoy. Remember, you can pick an old master here and do add master, or you can hire a new one. These convoys seem a little bit safer to use than the Cathay ones. In fact, I've never lost a convoy yet. There's almost always a way to hide. It has a different grouping of events, and it tells you what the army is. Once you create a convoy, though, so we can't actually create one here. If you look at the various places, which change every 3 turns, you will take a resource to there and you'll get a resource in return. Unlike Cathay, which just travels, takes money to start, and then gives you even more money and sometimes items at the end. The Chaos Dwarfs lets you know what you're going to do. So over here, for example, you'll see a red arrow here. This is how many you spend armaments, and in exchange you get money. This covers all the resources. So here's armaments for slaves. Here's money for raw materials. And somewhere, the only thing I don't think you can get is I don't think you can actually get armaments from trading, which makes some sense. Instead, you give up armaments or gold to get another benefit. You're going to want to prioritize getting labor. Unless you're conquering a lot, this is really your only other source of labor, barring slave revolts. It will not solve your labor problems unless you're a single province empire. It's only like 500 or 600 labor. On the other hand, it can sustain your empire. Small to medium empires from losing all their labor, even if it doesn't really fill up your labor pool, it kind of equals it out. When in doubt, collect labor. Unless you specifically need materials, in which case you could trade for that, or you need money. In my experience, you'll probably not need money. Chaos Dwarves, I find, have too much money. If that changes, it will rise in priority, but I don't think it will, because otherwise the faction gets way more complex. So focus on getting labor. And if you need raw materials, the raw materials, trade money for raw materials. Trade money for anything first. Then trade armaments. Armaments are more valuable than money for your faction. You'll probably get and have more money than you'd expect. Their money buildings are really solid. I'm not kidding. It's just kind of cool. They start on the map. Here you can tell where they are. Obviously, this lets you know where the threat is. At least in this mode, you can trade freely with most of the Chaos factions because they like you. If you start trading your way through order factions, let's call them the good order factions, like the dwarves, the empire, the elves, you start to have trouble. By and large, even the ogres aren't that bad. You'll have choices, usually gain units, spend cargo, always take the units, lose units. Unless the battle you're fighting is bad, lose the unit, fight the battle. If you're going to lose the unit, rather than using the full convoy. And if we were to let's see, here we go. If we are to look at this guy here, this is a convoy overseer. He has a line of skills, very similar to Cathay ones, but I'll cover it again here. Reducing convoy ambush at level 1 is the best. Take that. Convoy ambush is hurt. That's how you lose your convoys usually, because you can't see the battle you're fighting. The next one here, hidden stores. If you get it to level 3, it will replenish everywhere, which means your convoy will not get worn down by fighting multiple battles over several stages of your journey. Very strong. At that point, you can either try and enhance them so you get more value from your cargo. If you're doing short routes for labor and they're safe, take this. cargo capacity, again, safe routes. Otherwise, you're going to want to improve usually you want to improve the units rather than the Lord, Convoy, Overseer. These guys level up fast due to a technology. But basically, you set your destination. You can choose how much stuff you're sending. In this case, I'm sending 1,500 gold. I'm getting 737 labor. 11 units in the army will take 10 turns. Pretty simple. Go watch The Help. They explain it very well. If you've played Cathay, you got it. So, one other thing that needs to be discussed is the drill. So, even if you're not playing the mode where you have to build the drill, you still have access somewhat to this mechanic. The drill requires certain relics of the normal dwarves, the good dwarves, the order dwarves, to be taken and put into the drill to enhance it. Now, in the other game mode, Immortal Empires, these still exist, but they're not used for the drill, so they give other benefits. Make sense? It's pretty simple once you see it played. These are various Dwarven relics scattered around the world. For example, this one, you beat this army in battle. You have a choice in this game mode to improve the drill, and you'll see the benefits you get. Power the Great Drill, you need 4. If you claim it for yourself, though, you get a unique item, which is very strong, as well as Conclave Influence. Certain of these battles you want to fight, for sure. Otherwise, the final battle of the Chaos Dwarf campaign is really hard. It's easier than other of the final battles, only if you make sure to fight certain of these campaign relics. So the ones to look at here is the Major Ancestor Relic of Gringi. Once you defeat it, the Dwarves of the Grey Mountain will not join the final battle. Otherwise, it's another wave of strong units. If you're up here, this one will prevent the Demons of the Sunken Sewers, a Nurgle army, from appearing. Over here will prevent an Ogre army from appearing. Doing all 3 makes the final battle way easier. I've done it with 2 of them reinforcing, and that was a struggle. 1 reinforcing isn't that bad. The dwarves were definitely the biggest threat showing up at the end battle. They show up with lots of bombers as well as high-level units. And in a one-on-one fight between your dwarves and their dwarves, it's kind of even, depending on how you've enhanced your units. You may have the edge. If you haven't enhanced units, they will wreck you. And the bombers are terrible to fight. I hate fighting dwarf bombers. The only thing that ever countered them is vampire bats, which is hilarious. So just be aware that in the normal map mode, obviously there's no drill enhancement, but you can get some of these other benefits of getting the items and stuff. Some of these, like this one, is really strong. You get ever-burning light, which affects people around you all the time. So some people have their enemies will be blinded, so they won't be able to attack as easily, as well as 5 melee attack in your entire army is really strong. So just look through them all. Some are better than others. These single army ones are stronger than the Tomb King armies they have to conquer for their gain books, as well as the others who are all after those weird tombs of Nagash. These are strong armies. You may need 2 armies to beat them. If you've got a massively enhanced army, so multiple war machines, almost all Chaos Dwarves, no hobgoblins, couple lords, you might be able to trade with them. An average army is not going to be able to fight these guys without another army helping them. These are strong roaming armies. They won't take your settlements, but if your army gets near them, they will chase that army down. I had one chase me through an entire mountain range. Eventually, I got him to fight near one of my settlements, and I used the settlements to beat them. That's the easy way to get rid of them. Okay, let's talk about research. So the Chaos Dwarfs have 3 distinct technology trees: military, sorcery, industry. Military will use armaments at various points to progress the tech. Sorcery will use influence, and industry will use raw materials. So let's start with the first one you should do. The first one you should do here is industry labor quotas. This just gives 5 more labor captives gained per battle. It's a flat enhancement. Getting it early on will just help with your labor problems throughout the whole game. It's quick. It's only, I think, 2 turns to get. Simple. Grab it. Forget about it. Best one to grab early on. After that, I do recommend working a little bit more on your military. Be aware that hollow rounds here, martial training. So basically everything beyond the first 2 or 3 you do is locked behind armaments, which is why you're going to need a lot of them. Thankfully, it's only a couple places. Snag those. Once you can, reduced rations, alchemical remedies, ammunition catches. Once this is researchable, snag it. Ammunition, casualty replenishment, as well as reduced upkeep. You can never go wrong with them. In terms of the military tree here, at the start, you're going to want to research on the left until you're able to get a lot of armaments to research more on the right. So right here, this enhances and makes cheaper your hobgoblin units, your hobgoblin cavalry units. It improves the leadership and melee defense for your hobgoblins as well as your laborers. Since you're going to be using a lot of hobgoblins and laborers in the first couple turns, makes sense to make them stronger so your expansion's easier. Snag at least this tech, if not the other couple. Once you can afford it, you can get mandatory service, which adds cheaper recruitment. Remember, the stacks with the edict of 20%, so you could be looking at 30% cheaper. You can recruit more globally. Mass production, again, reduces your global recruitment. All told, you can get, I think, 5 reduced global, which is basically build everything in one turn, let's be honest. Roaming roundups, if you're trying to destabilize the enemy by raiding and walking through your lands, this helps. Overall, not that strong. You don't need money from raiding. If this enhanced the slaves you got from raiding, slave laborers, it would be more useful, but it doesn't appear to. Raising, sacking, if you're doing a lot of that, take this. Otherwise, forget about it. The reality is, your money, you don't need money. Living metal, this is really good. Bull centaurs are really strong. I'm a big fan of them. Once you can afford to get these techs, snag them. Sadly, they come after you have to research the hobgoblins. So research the hobgoblins early on. Otherwise, later on, you'll be stuck researching techs you won't really be using. Temple training, again, more enhancements to them. Perfect vigor is great for a cav unit. Your bull centaurs used properly, as well as your bull centaur renderers. Used properly, they will level up really quickly because they're strong cav units. Mighty Monsters improves your flying units. Award saves, always good. Beasts of Zar, again, cheaper to expand their armaments. You'll see this in most of the military tree. Weapon strength and number of uses for summonings, as well as bound abilities. Be aware that your hobgoblins and your laborers have no army cap. So while you're going to have army caps early on, preventing you from getting more Chaos Dwarfs, more beneficial to enhance your hobgoblins rather than later. The right side is all your Chaos Dwarfs. The level 1 is great. Leadership, melee defense. Honestly, I tend to research it after I research the level 1 Stronghold Syndrome. Not Stockholm Syndrome. Stronghold, just to make that clear, because apparently it's important. Makes them stronger. You tend to start with 3 units of Chaos Dwarves, or 2 or 3, so this just makes them that much better. Martial training, once you can afford an armament, 1 recruitment rank as well as experience gain is amazing, especially on a warlike faction. Ceaseless march, movement range, always good. You'll notice the Chaos Dwarves get a lot of movement range boosts. I'm pretty sure they're the farthest movement range. Only exception might be Vlad, just because his movement bonus gets to be insane as the vampires. Reinforcement time and range. This is great if you've got several armies operating together. Smog Shroud, have better chance of ambushing and avoiding during the underway. More of a defensive ability than a pure offensive one, but still a solid one when you've got time. Hollow rounds. This improves your gun units. We already covered that. Varied trading. Cheaper to expand the capacity of your dwarf units. Get this before you really start spending armaments to enhance your capacity, so your armaments go further, as well as another recruitment rank. You can get like level 7 Chaos Dwarf units on recruitment without even really specializing in it. It's funny. Boiling Blood enhances your Kadai. Solid enhancements. Cheaper to expand them. Adds Flammable, which is nice. Reducing fire resistant for a fire unit. Really solid. Continuous Bombardment enhances your artillery. It's a great thing. Good improvement. More damage. More ammunition. And then cheaper to expand them, as well as Infernal Engineer ability here, which helps with reload skills and stuff. This one up here, obviously, it's locked behind Weapons Depot. Another +2 recruitment rank. You're looking at +4 or 5 just from tech alone, as well as more recruitment capacity. Total War, I love the self-reference, adds the ability to enhance your Forge Craft units more. So rather than 3, you can get to 5. Great for endgame, not so good early to mid-game just because you don't have the armaments. However, medical supplies, ward save on all characters, cheaper wound recovery on all characters. If your characters are becoming immortal, this is just a flat major buff. 5 ward save is amazing. The reduced wound time is great if you lose armies. Chosen by the Father, weapon strength, and hit points for the characters. Again, a really solid one. Let's hit industry before we hit sorcery, which is the less useful one. So after we've hit labor quotas, harbor guilds is useless. Chaos Dwarfs don't really have any ports early on unless you expand that way. However, Hutter Furnaces is good because it gives you more armament output. It's a free output. It doesn't cost more laborers or raw materials to produce, which is nice, as well as increases your income. Over here, Merchant Guild enhances your trade. Kind of useless because your trade sucks. However, Veteran Convoy Masters is good. Gives them rank 3 when you get them. There's other ways to enhance them. The tower gets you, I think, +5. So you get 8. More importantly, though, they gain experience per turn. So after they survive for a while, they get that much stronger. Resource extractors. If you've got gem and gold mines, great. Otherwise, ignore. Let's go east. We'll talk about the top later. Wartime economy. Honestly, it sounds great. Kind of useless. You're not going to be building tons of military buildings everywhere. You're going to be using global recruitment more often. Still cheaper and faster. It's always nice. Territorial consignments, defense buildings cheaper and faster. Take this once you're starting to throw down garrison buildings in your minor settlements because you don't need anything else and you have excess resources. We'll make them go further. Siege logistics really helps on the defense. Makes taking territorial consignments early on actually worth it. Siege supplies, more defense supplies, more reduced attrition, stacks nicely with your defense of 25, so you'd be 45 reduction in loss to attrition, as well as more troops, allowing you to survive longer for armies to reinforce. Very strong, very powerful. Up here, you'll see that industrial security here would... I already researched it, but it did require raw materials. A lot of raw materials. Industrial security, more movement range from your tower patrols building, as well as the upkeep. This just enhances buildings you should already be building, usually worth taking. Resource extractors, again, I already mentioned the income. Arms monopoly, if you're doing lots of convoys and that's how you're sustaining yourself, take it. Otherwise, less useful. This one is really good. The unilateral agreements, you get a unit for every convoy you complete. It's really nice. More income. Your trade tariffs are already terrible. This just improves them continuously, so they actually gain in value, but the value is so low you might not see a huge benefit, but the unit is worth it, because you tend to lose 1 or 2 units a convoy expedition. This one, reduced chance of convoy ambush, stacked with the fully maxed out skill, it's 100%. Plus allows you another convoy. If you're sustaining yourself through convoys, really good tech. Industrial Revolution, faster factories and building, pretty decent. Next one here, stockpiling. Iron and timber provides 15% armament output for provinces. If you've got iron and timber, this is great. Turn that area into a factory region. The guy I showed you, capital has iron in it, which is great. Faster building of tower settlement buildings and cheaper really helps getting those major capital settlements up and productive faster. Honestly, a good tech. Cost is a little steep. Workforce dictats. You gain an additional 5 when you sacrifice 200 slaves, or you get more money. Not really powerful. If you play it right, you shouldn't have public order problems anyway. Labor organizations reduce workload requirements, amazing tech, as well as labor gained. Probably one of the best ones in the entire tech tree, of all 3 trees, because it solves a lot of your workforce problems. Sorcery is worth mentioning. Mainly tallest towers should be taken 2nd or like 4th in tech. Depends if you get the hobgoblin enhancements first or not. +1 control all provinces early on. Prevents some of those revolts, or at least delays them, as well as allows you to see further. After that, the tech this tech is good. The problem is the other trees are stronger. Pandemic helps reduce plague. All told, you can pretty much prevent plague in your lands, as well as you spread more corruption. If you're having public order problems due to corruption or plagues, worth taking. Now we have a division here of which way do you go. Over here, this is going to enhance your bull centaurs as well as your relations with the Chaos Dwarfs. If you can get an alliance with the Sentinels of the Conclave or whatever they're called, you can recruit some really powerful Chaos Dwarf units early on. The Allegiant point gain helps a lot with that. Malicious compliance, more control, more casualties, really good once you can afford the influence. Wouldn't take it early on just because that influence is better spent buying a couple seats, but late early game, early mid games worth snagging. Ruinous negotiations, this pretty much prevents you from being attacked by chaos factions. It's really nice. Again, improvements to your quotas, commandments, armaments, income, additional recruitment rank. If you're taking everything else, you're looking at plus, I think, 6 to your unit ranks upon recruitment, which is really good. Metallurgy, you're using Lore of Metal, great. The reality is you take this to unlock the other ones. Conclave dominance, if you've got a tower settlement, you get plus 2 conclave influence. The reality is by the time you get here, you're probably generating all the influence you need. You could make a play to get this early, but I find it better to improve your economy or your army rather than something you'll get as you expand more anyway, since everything you conquer gives you more conclave influence anyhow. Winds of Magic Reserve, who cares? Once you complete the other ones, you get Communing Altar. By the time you get this, you should have as much influence as you need, so it's less useful. The research rate, honestly, kind of pathetic for a late game tech. Over here, the Reverence, if you're going to build your temples, which you should to get influence, plus 5 is huge, as well as the reduction in recruitment time is amazing. Once you get this, you should dominate the Conclave, barring another human player competing with you. The AI does not know how to do it well. Ashki Bound, if you're using fire spells, is great. Powers of the Conclave, plus 1 to all abilities granted by the seats. So more army ability bombardments is an amazing tech. Sadly, it's just so deep, and some of the techs on the way aren't as great. On the left one here, chance of getting more items, more mages. Finest leaders, up recruitment rank is nice, not game breaking, but if you're raising new armies, definitely helps. Signature spellcasting helps you with the lore of Hashut, or however you say the name. Mutual benefits, more relations with the demons of chaos, as well as cheaper recruitment of allied units, stacked with malicious compliance. Oh, sorry. Where is that one? Envoys to the Conclave, you can recruit the Sentinels of the Conclave stuff much cheaper. Which don't underestimate the ability to recruit those early game. You can get top line units like 20 turns into the game if you do alliances there. Just have to keep them alive. An improvement to your edicts, honestly, outside of the control one, not as useful. The construction. Decrease in time for the lore of Hashut, pretty straightforward. If you're using a lot of those mages, get it. Otherwise, there's better ones. If you're having trouble with attrition, it's nice. The reality is you shouldn't be having trouble with attrition because you can just use the underway stance, which prevents all attrition, which is really game breaking in my opinion. Sacrificial bats here, additional labor if you sacrifice slave labor. Why would you be sacrificing a resource that is already limited and you're struggling with? Over here, Lore of Death, cheaper to build and use. Mass sacrifice, more Winds of Magic. If it was per turn, it'd be stronger. Otherwise, it's just halfway decent. And that is all the tech for the faction. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the various units in Magic now. So, the spells you have access to, and we will just go over it here. You have access to the Lore of Metal. You have access to the Lore of Hashut, which is kind of interesting. You get a lot of these weird fireball techs as well as magic vulnerability. Some, like the Hellhammer, are quite nice versus dwarves. Other ones, like Reforge, certain Chaos Dwarf units are considered Hellforge constructs. This allows you to repair them, thinking Tomb Kings if you've played them. yeah, overall, the lore of Hashut feels almost overly strong. The uses of the magic can be painful unless you own the Conclave Seat, which gives you magic per turn, in which case you want to have a magic user in every army and just spam spells. One of the better ones you'll gain access to early on, Burning Wrath. It's a magic missile spell that has a large explosive damage. You get it pretty early on. It's relatively cheap. You're going to want to use that on a lot of your magic users and just keep spamming it, basically. It's pretty accurate, too. And then you have access to fire as well, Ashki spells. Obviously, some of them, the Flamestorm is great if you can drop on a group of units. Otherwise, Burning Head and some of the other ones are solid as well. And then you have death spells, Purple Sun of Xerxes, as well as Spirit Leech can really help burning down enemy lords or dealing with large chunks of units. Out of them, though, I would tend to take Hashut spells. They're pretty strong. Metal is decent. Fire is only good if you've got a Hashut one to cast. What is it? Ash Storm, which spreads weakness to fire damage. You cast that, then have a Fire Mage hit them with fire. Really strong combo. Of course, Hashut has fire spells on their own as well. Also, it's worth mentioning that all the Chaos Dwarves have access to this legendary lord here, Gordut's Backstabber. You get in by having 10 Hobgoblin units, which you can do in like the first 2-3 turns. All you have to do is build a Hobgoblin military building and recruit units. Considering you don't have a lot of Chaos Dwarf units and you don't want to use Laborer units, you're pretty much going to get this guy, stick it in your Legendary Lord army. He's one of the best fighters you will have. He's really strong. He enhances all your Hobgoblin units, which makes your Hobgoblins that much more decent. Anyhow, should mention that. So let's start working down the various units. So let's finish with heroes. You have an Infernal Castilian, who is a range unit. Let's see, do I have one? Actually, I don't think I have one at this point in the game. Think the Dwarf Ranger type hero unit. They're not bad. They're not the world's greatest ones. They're pretty decent at skirmishing. They get a huge amount of range. You can have them snipe. I found the best use for them was sniping either lords, heroes, monsters, or more importantly, flying units, which is something the Chaos Dwarves actually struggle to fight. The dwarf flying units are a pain to deal with as the Chaos Dwarves. And then you have the Bull Centaurs. They're really strong. These guys are some of the best fighter heroes in the game. Good armor, good combat stats. You can improve them. If I dig out my Legendary Lord, let's see, I think he was over here. Yeah. If we were to look at, you get one of these at the start of his campaign here. You can get Temple Guardian and improve other lords or heroes. If you combine that guy, honestly, he's just strong in general. If you combine him with Gordut's Backstabber, the legendary hero I mentioned who improves hobgoblins, this guy suddenly starts getting physical resistance as well as doing lots of damage. It's a very strong combo. That duo is quite capable of soloing any lord in the game together. It's very easy to maintain them since you usually start with one of these guys. You can get to 20 quickly. And this guy's immortal, so combined with your legendary lord, those three can pretty much win you the game. I'm not kidding. Let's keep going down. So the Chaos Dwarves actually have a surprisingly limited roster of range units. I felt honestly, I'm surprised they don't have another one. They make up for their war machines, though. So your first one here is your Hobgoblin Archers. These guys look pathetic. They're actually not. I found them to be some of the better archer units in the game. They've got good range. They do decent ammunition, flaming. They don't hold up well in combat, but they're pretty cheap and easy to maintain. For a level 1 archer, they're solid. The next one here is your Chaos Dwarf Blunderbuss. They're better than the Dwarf Ranger units who use guns, because these guys have armor piercing missiles, meaning they can wreck almost anything in the game if they fire. You get 2 of these firing at a Lord or Hero unit, it's going to go down at about 3 to 4 volleys. The damage is nuts. Don't have the largest range, and their combat stats aren't that great, but remember, you can enhance them. I would bring at least 2 or 3 of these in every army, unless you want to do the old dwarf strategy of turtling in the corner and using artillery. I found, though, it was better to bring more artillery than another one of these guys. These do deserve a special mention, though, as that these are actually really the only Chaos Dwarf unit that's good with dealing with flying units. The Hobgoblins aren't that great because they have low missile damage. These guys, you're fighting a flying Lord, will wreck them. Only problem is you got to remember to turn off skirmish, and they die in melee combat. Decent melee combatant, they're decent. I don't think they're that good at it myself. They are decently armored, though, so I guess that makes that. The Fireglaves, on the other hand, are significantly better. The only problem is they're expensive, and they're not as effective at mass volleys, in my opinion, but they might improve that with various patches. They're strong, they're solid, they fire from large range, do a lot of missile damage. The volleys, they have a 9-second reload time. If you look down here, these guys are similar. These guys have an 11. So overall, the Fireglaves are stronger. You just won't have them early on, in which case the blunderbusses do their job for most of the game. Now, in terms of missile cavalry and chariot, this is a forgettable unit. Hobgoblin Wolf Raiders, only good for early game skirmishing. Honestly, you can just not bother with these guys. The Hobgoblin Archers are probably better. These guys are going to lose in a fight with almost anybody. But hey, if you're a skirmisher, by all means use them. They do provide leadership to other units within contempt range. So while I'm here, since we've just covered this, it's worth mentioning what contempt is. You have units here, these Orc and Goblin Laborers, which are pure trash units. You'll only use them to max out your armies. Think zombies, but a little bit better. They are meat shield expendables. The key with expendable is that friendly units do not reduce leadership when witnessing these guys rout, unless you're also expendable. However, the Chaos Dwarfs seem to have another tier in between, which is interesting. They have these Hobgoblins, which are not expendable, and enhance each other's leadership. On top of that, you have the Chaos Dwarf unit, we'll just go with their basic warriors, who have Contempt, which is unless another unit routs that has Contempt, they don't lose leadership. Meaning your expendable units, your laborers, only are affected by other laborers routing. Your Hobgoblins aren't affected by the laborers, but only other Hobgoblins. And then finally, you've got the Chaos Dwarves, who are only affected by other Chaos Dwarves routing. So there's almost 3 tiers there, meaning the Chaos Dwarves are going to stand and fight regardless of what happens to the rest of the army, and the Hobgoblins kind of are affected by other stuff, but they also self-buff themselves a little bit by leadership. So let's jump over to infantry, since War Machines is going to take a while. So Goblin Laborers are complete trash. I wouldn't build these if I could help it. You're better off with Orc Laborers, who actually have some combat ability. Slightly less defensive, but honestly, the increased melee attack is the only good thing there. Plus, the armor piercing damage is more beneficial, I think, than increased melee defense. Then you have your Hobgoblins. The Hobgoblins, since you have capacity on your Dwarf units, but not on your Hobgoblins, the Hobgoblins are going to make up your early game armies, and they're decent for that fact. You'll have a strong core of Chaos units, as well as War Machines and Cavalry, supplemented by a much larger amount of Hobgoblins. They have three different ones. Obviously, your Archers are good. It's worth bringing some of them until you get Dwarf Blunderbusses. But you've got Cutthroats, which are a fairly solid early game unit. They're a little bit better than you would expect from an average level 1 unit, but they're not great. You've got the Sneaky Gits here, who have a decent missile strength weapon. The reality, though, is I don't bring these, and I won't probably bring these to many battles, because I'm much better off with a Dwarf Blunderbuss or a Hobgoblin Archer compared to the loss in combat stats, as well as the shield here. On the other hand, they do have stalk, so you could flank and get a good ambush off, and they do have poison to weaken enemies. So they have their place. Some people are going to use them, some people won't. They're only a level 1 though, and they die in any combat with pretty much anything, whereas I'd much rather have cutthroats, which actually can fight a little bit. Then you've got your Chaos Warriors. They come in both shielded with axe or great weapons. Be aware the great weapons don't have shields, so they're vulnerable to range. However, both are very heavily armored, decent melee defense, not as great melee attack. In a one-on-one fight with no enhancements with the basic dwarves, I find the basic dwarves win. That could have just been the campaign experience. Once you start enhancing them, they become significantly stronger, and later on they can rise to pretty close to a tier 3 unit on their own with enhancements. On their own, with no enhancements though, they're better than average, but still not elite infantry. Great weapons, bring them if you're fighting other armored factions like the dwarves. If you fight the dwarves, bring 2 great weapons. If you don't fight the dwarves, or they're not or warriors of chaos, which are also highly armored, you're fine with just plain dwarf warriors. Remember though, you have a cap on them. Then you get your Infernal Guard, which by and large is just a general increase to your base dwarf unit. They don't excel at anything different. They're just better. They're more expensive to maintain, obviously. Again, Chaos Dwarf money is not really a problem. They're tier 3, but I would say they're on the lower end of tier 3. They're very tanky, very good at defense while your range or artillery kill things. Don't expect them to kill everything on their own. They do a decent exchange. They do struggle, though, if the enemy has magic weapons or armor piercing, though. So just be aware of that. Again, great weapons bring against armored units. Then you get your Infernal Ironsworn. Now, these guys are definitely a level 3 tier. They can be enhanced. Once they're enhanced, they're probably some of the finest infantry in the game, assuming you don't mess up the enhancements or the enemy doesn't perfectly counter you. So, disclaimer. They have flaming attacks, which is good. They work very well against vampires and other stuff. They also have magic attacks, which ignore armor. Ignore magic physical resistance as well. However, you can have resistance to magic as well as resistance to fire. Imric of the High Elves in particular, his units are slightly more resistant to fire damage, meaning these guys struggle a little bit more against them than your Infernal Guard, which doesn't have flaming weapons. So it can be countered by people resistant to both magic and flame. Otherwise, they're really good. They have 2 ammunition, ranged weapon. It's a solid ranged weapon. It does decent damage. Not going to win you the battle, but it's pretty cool to use. I won't spoil it. It's kind of neat, but it's not game changing. It's not like Iron Drakes of the normal dwarves, which would be cool. Okay, now let's get into some of the more interesting stuff. So the cavalry. You have Hobgoblin Wolf Riders, which are similar to their raiders. They're trash. Only bring these if you're going to run down archers or chase off fleeing units. The reality is I never really use them that much, and I probably never will. I've tried them a couple times, and they died. They're not great. However, these Bull Centaur Renders, both with dual axes, better versus infantry versus armored units. This is kind of like a great weapons. These guys are, I'm not kidding, some of the best stuff you will come across in game. These guys are solid cavalry on par with Bretonnia. They hit hard. You can get them ward save type stuff later on. Fully upgraded. These guys, their Regiment of Renown also has Guardian, which is worth mentioning, and Revel in Fear as well. But by and large, they're fast, hard-hitting cavalry. They're armored and shielded if you take the Renderers. Obviously, not armored and shielded with dual axes. I would go with the shields. There are not a lot of cav units that have good shields as well as decent armor and combat ability. These guys check almost every box. They're quite capable of wrecking. I sent one into 5 regiments of dwarf pickaxes, dwarf miners, which arguably are not great units. It wrecked them without even losing a single unit. So very powerful. They solve the problem of speed. and they hit decently hard. Plus, they're armored piercing as well, so they handle themselves against high armored units decently well, I will say. There is a great weapons version, which is anti-large if you want to use it. So you've got your general purpose renderers, you've got your dual axes, which are infantry but vulnerable to range, and you got your great weapons, which are not as good against infantry but better against armor and also are vulnerable to range. So anti-range, anti-infantry, anti-large. Think of it that way. Further down here, your monsters and beasts. The Great Taurus here is kind of your flying, semi-dragon, more like griffin unit. Single entity, hits decently hard. Does struggle a little bit in the long run in combat, but it does have blazing body, so it does get resistance and damage reflection. Overall, a decent tank, slightly vulnerable to range, faster than I would expect from a flying unit. Pretty decent. However, there are better ones. These Lamassu one, this is where things start to get interesting. This is a flying monster, but it has magical weapon negation. Any late game army, and I expect a lot of multiplayer armies to need this. So all the Chaos Dwarf units, obviously not hobgoblins and goblins, are decently armored, meaning the counter for them is to bring anti-armor or, more simply, magic weapons, because that pierces the armor. This unit here negates magical weapons in a radius around itself. Now, to be fair, it's not huge, but it counters the ability to counter your armor. So it's a countering counter unit, which is kind of fun. It's overall decently strong, has a spell cast to be used, 2 of them actually, and causes terror. So overall, pretty decent. You'll see it on the Chaos Dwarf Sorcerers at times, in which case it's kind of cool that it negates magical weapons. I'm just not gonna lie. It's worth bringing one of these to a late game army fight in case there are magical weapons brought. The next one here, we're starting to get into the Fireborn, the Kadai Fireborn. This is a Hellforged construct, which deserves special mention. If you played the Tomb Kings, you'll know what a construct is. Basically, they don't really rout. They take damage and then collapse eventually when they lose leadership, similar to like the vampires, any of the undead factions. However, they're Hellforged, so they can be restored by your Demon Smith magic users. Overall, solid fighter. They have magic attacks and flame, making them decent fighting heavily armored units. If there's a tech at level 7 that makes them cause fire vulnerability with each attack, which makes them that much better. It improves themselves and other spells being cast around them. They are Burning Bright, which is their unbreakable. As long as they have over 50 hit points, they can't rout or take damage. Blazing Body, they reflect damage. Overall, a great tanky unit you send in. They're going to equip themselves very well. If they're fighting trash units, they will absolutely tear them to shreds. They struggle a bit against lords and other stuff, and once their leadership is shattered, they collapse and die. The only downside to them is that collapse and die. If they were a normal unit and they just routed, I think they would actually be better. Then you have your Bale Taurus, which is a flying quasi-dragon unit. Breeze Flame. Overall, treat it like your normal dragon. They're pretty solid. They're fast. They hit hard. They do decent damage. They do reflect damage as well. They also cause wounds. Can be enhanced further. Overall, better than a Great Taurus in my opinion, but more expensive to maintain. And then you've got your Kadal Destroyer units. Now, this is your elite monster unit, similar to like a Hero Titan of the Tomb Kings. Again, another Hellforge, so can be repaired during battle by your Demon Smiths. Solid, hard hitting. Does have instability if it gets low. Burning Bright, Hellish Frenzy, as long as it's got a lot of hit points, hits harder. Blazing Body, reflects damage as well as physical resistance. Overall, a really solid unit. If this was a multi-unit entity, it would even be that much more powerful. Being a single entity, though, be aware that if it's damaged, it can be repaired better and faster than if it was a multi-entity one. During sieges and recovery, you can use healing spells on it because it's like a lord or hero can heal it all the way full so long as it has the ability to be healed more. Great unit, very solid. Extended roster here. These are unique ones. Supply train here is from a mission. I don't think you can recruit it normally. Over here, now we got artillery and war machines. This makes the Chaos Dwarfs. I was surprised, though, when I played the Chaos Dwarfs. I expected their artillery to be better than it is. It's good, don't get me wrong. But there are other artillery and other factions that kind of equals it. So your first one here is Magma Cannon, long range, decent attack. Semi-inaccurate, does have a decent period between reloads, 10 seconds. Explosive damage, if you set this up, the enemy is going to have to come to you because they will bombard you. It is Hellforge, so can be healed again by Demon Priest. Can outduel other artillery I found. And does flaming damage, which is kind of nice. Iron Demon here. This one I'm still trying to figure out how to use properly. It's kind of like a train that does pretty decent, has range. Can survive for a little while melee combat, but it's not like the Empire's tank units. It's worse than that. Its missile strength, if it uses it, is pretty good. Decent range. Little hard to aim and seems pretty slow to actually attack with that level 11 seconds reload. Does do 2 shots, 3 projectiles. Pretty decent damage over time. It is armor piercing though, so if you get an attack on a heavily armored unit, it will work. Kind of functions as a more mobile artillery unit with a short range. I tend to send it in on the flanks of my armies or in between regiments to shoot, where it proves to be decent. Skullcracker is a weird one. This is kind of like a melee one, but the big benefit it brings is the ability to break walls during sieges rather than have to climb them or hack them down. The problem is you can tend to blast them with your other artillery. Decent in melee attack, does additional damage when colliding, has a charge, is hellbound, so it is magic resistance, perfect vigor, as long as it's got hit points. It's okay in melee combat. I didn't find it as good as a level 3 tier that it says it is. Then we get into some of the interesting ones. Deathstreak launchers here. This is a solid long range unit. It does have 2 different shots. The Deathstreaker rocket here is pretty good at hitting mass units. The Demolition rocket is better against single targets. If you'll notice, it has a bonus versus large plus 500. If you're shooting at single entity units, heroes, or even small entity units, go with the Demolition rocket. If you're shooting large normal units, the Deathstreaker is much better. It's surprisingly pretty accurate. It seems to be a little bit more accurate than most artillery in my mind. It's the first artillery you're going to get that's going to feel really good. Magma Cannon is on the weaker side. Hits hard, does decent damage, magic, flaming damage, armor piercing. It's going to pretty much wreck whatever it hits. Although the damage is a little bit lower than you would like. However, that's made up by the next one, the Hell Cannon. Great unit. You've seen this before in Total Warhammer 1 or 2. Long range, as in very long range. Good missile strength, decent damage, can improve itself. Overall, great unit. Bring it to battles. It will pay for itself, and it'll probably get about 200 kills a battle. Some of these other ones will only get like 40 or 50. It's worth mentioning this Iceforge Legion, which is a regiment of renown, is better than the Hell Cannon, so is definitely worth getting when you get the chance. It's similar, but slightly different. Those are regiments of renown. Dreadquake Mortar. This is a very, very powerful siege unit. Decent range, strong attack. Overall, pretty powerful. It's pretty good at sieges more than anything else. It does have a slow reload time of 24 seconds, but if it hits, it makes up for that slow reload time. If it misses or gets taken out or the enemy moves out of range, doesn't really pay for itself. If you know how to use it, it's great. Any of these Dreadquakes are great. So we got a Skullcracker, which is pretty much the old Skullcracker here, just improved to be a Dreadquake one to make it stronger. Yeah. Same thing here with the Iron Demon. It's just an enhancement of the Iron Demon here with basically less shots, but honestly slightly more powerful. So think of it that way. You've got options. You got short range powerful ones, you've got a melee one, and then you've got long range blasting ones. In my opinion, the long range blasting ones, starting with the Death Shrieker rocket, are stronger. Hell cannons are not to be underestimated though. Play around with it. Maybe you'll find the Iron Demon a little bit better than I did, but I was iffy on it. The magma cannons though felt rather weak, but I'm sure some people can use them better, especially if you can aim them yourself. They'll do decent damage. Okay, on to the various lords and starting locations. So the first one, Ostrogoth Ironhand. His special faction stuff is he gets more Conclave influence, he researches faster, and he has more control. All good things for the Chaos Dwarfs. He is also a very powerful mage who has a specialty with the Hellhammer. So as usual for a Lord, you usually want to start the blue line. In fact, for the Chaos Dwarves, it's even more beneficial. Start with Route Marcher, followed up by Logician. Then, actually, for the Chaos Dwarves, you probably want to do Tyrant here, at least one level, because you'll get more labor post-battle as well as money. Ruthless Disciplinarian, if you're turtling or being defensive, is solid. Overall, though, Cunning, unless you're doing lots of ambushing, is the least useful in that category. Iron-Willed, faster recovery as well as healing, always good, plus you need it to get further. Further on down here, the best one in this category is Serve or Die, fully upgraded, 15% cheaper recruitment. We've already talked about the various unit levels and recruitment. You could be looking at 60% cheaper units or so, and level 7 or 8 units upon recruitment, especially enhanced by Unbridled Cruelty, where they're cheaper to maintain and heal faster as well as march further. However, you need another point to get to Unbridled Cruelty, so you want to go down Lightning Strikes. Late game, end game, you need Lightning Strikes so that you can only fight one army at a time rather than multiple ones, but it's weaker to Serve or Die early on. Next one here, Red Line, less useful than some other factions. Inspiring Presence, though, is worth mentioning because it gives unit experience. Outside of that, ignore the fodder here. It's pretty much not worth it unless you're using them as meat shields, but you're much better off using Chaos Dwarves as meat shields since they already have the defense and can actually kill stuff. Great enhancement for them, worth taking. I would say more towards late game because the units are good anyway. This guy's a magic user, so it's usually worth more to get that. Range, if you're using a lot of range units, get it, but by and large, I didn't feel that my range units needed much enhancements. Artillery enhancements, the range is decent. You probably are going to outrange anybody anyway. The ammunition, the Chaos Dwarves have low ammunition anyhow. This helps, but it's not a game-changing enhancement. Crushing Charge improves your bull centers, but not in such a way that this is a needed upgrade early on. Hellish Blows, this is going to improve your flying and monstrous units. It's pretty good at that point. Rally, however, it is worth mentioning that some of these last ones, Lucky Lackey, ward saves, if you're using cheap units, worth taking, but otherwise I wouldn't. Go for Marshaled Military though. Spell Resistance for Chaos Dwarves, melee and attack and defense. Once you get this, and upgrade your units in the Hellforge, your infantry will probably be the finest in the world. Bombardment, same thing for your guns, faster, more damage, all good. Wretched Warhost, if you're using cav or monsters, is good. I'm not going to go through this with every lord. This guy does have a melee line. Honestly, save this for last. He's a magic user and a buffer first. He should not be really used in combat. You're going to get a starting hero to work with him, combat hero, as well as you can get the Hobgoblin legendary hero. They're much better at fighting than he is anyhow. Now, in terms of magic, he's an Hashut Sorcerer, Burning Wrath. He starts with it. It's cheap. It's probably going to be your bread and butter spell for most of the game. He does have Killing Fire, which, if enemies are closely around him, they will take damage when he casts the spell. The reality is, though, they should never be that close to him, so less useful than you would think. On the other hand, Kindle Flame, slightly more useful because it affects enemies everywhere on the map and makes them vulnerable to fire magic. Combine that with Ash Storm, which also reduces their
fire resistance. You can get like plus 40 or 50 fire damage upon which you hit him with Burning Wrath or other ones. Flaming Sword of Ruin enhances your units. I would really have loved this guy to have Flamestorm, but whatever. Great to throw on your dwarf units that don't have flame if you need it. Excels fighting regenerating factions, Nurgles, vampires. Cascading Fire Cloak, arguably I think the weakest one here, but still worth mentioning. Hellhammer, very good spell. Even stronger on him because his special line reduces the cost by 6, meaning this spell anyhow, all told, if you upgrade it, only costs, let's get the level 1 here. Yeah, come on, give me a game. There we go. Hellhammer only costs 16. It's -6. If you upgrade this ability, it will become -4. So you'll be looking at about 6 or so Winds of Magic to cast spells on, or even less, meaning you can spam this spell multiple times. And you should. It replaces some of the other ones. Sadly, is not as high damage, but it's easier to aim. It's a wall spell. Flamestorm, you get it here. I wish it was back here. Regardless, great for massed units. Solid, and then the rest is pretty normal. Magical Reserves is really good, especially Greater Arcane Conduit. His special line of skills, get this after you finish the blue line. Don't rush to this. Gains Winds of Magic per turn. This is the strongest one here because you get lots of magic. You'll be able to cast spells like nobody's business. Cheaper allied recruitment. If you stack it with the 2 techs I mentioned earlier, you can recruit top of the line units from any faction for 50% cheaper. Plus, Chaos pretty much won't attack you. Architect of Evil. This really helps you with Bull Centaurs. This guy's oddly enough a Bull Centaur guy. Feels like he should be more magic, but he's Bull Centaurs. They become that much stronger and very powerful. Piercing Intellect. He gets, I think, 3 or 4 casts of Burning Wrath. It says 3. I think you get 4 or so. Free spells. They don't cost magic. Infernal Lord, you get more heroes, and they get higher level. It's great. Dark Sacrifice might be one of my best and favorite enhancements of all. Cheaper Winds of Magic on a magic user. Always good. And the rest of these are relatively self-explanatory. So he starts here in the city of Zlak, which is east of Valkia and Kislev, west of the other Chaos Dwarfs, is actually right near where Boris Ursus starts the game. Boris Ursus does not start in this game if you play as the Chaos Dwarfs, I will point out. If you play as Boris Ursus, the Chaos Dwarfs aren't in the game. So it's an interesting balance. He has an interesting expansion route. He's at war with the Greenskins to the south, so you want to conquer them. Then the easiest way to expand him is to go west and fight the Skaven. Be aware that they will probably sack your outer cities here, so don't enhance them. Focus on building up your capital. The other option is you could also go west, but then you're fighting Warriors of Chaos. If you go north, there's Ogres, which are worth expanding to, and then above that, there's the Nurgle faction. Probably not worth fighting the Chaos factions, since given time and Conclave and other techs, you can make them like you better, so you can ally them, which will help you getting the needed drill parts that are located in their lands. If you want, though, you can go fight them. Chaos Dwarves do pretty well against Nurgle because they have flaming stuff. It is not worth expanding super far south where the other Chaos Dwarves is, or to the east where Servants of the Conclave lurks. You can get one of the relics you need from going west. You can get 2 you need from going north, and the others you can either get through Alliance or Confederation later on over here. If you really want to, you can expand and fight the vampires down here. Again, they die pretty quickly to you because you have flame in their regenerators, and cancel out the other rune that you need over there. Overall, safe spot. Definitely put a garrison building in this, though, because you're at the conflux of everything moving east to west. So if Kislev expands up here, they will come for you. They also have a very nasty tendency to want to cross these mountains. This is where the movement bonuses and underway will help you. And there's also a lot of dwarves down here who absolutely hate you. So anyway, this is the Realm of Chaos one. Let's jump over to Immortal Empires. Okay, here we are with the starting position in Immortal Empires. So this is basically where you started the game in the Realm of Chaos, just turned to its side slightly. So think of it that way. You're located here at the northern part of the Badlands, which for your reference here is just south of the Chaos Wastes and east of Kislev and the Slayer King and one of my least favorite people, Azog of the Bone Rattlers. You're located at a decent spot. Be aware that Grimgor is located to your east and can cause you some trouble. Chaos is to the north, so as long as you're friends with them, that's a pretty easy trade route. Safe too. Your goal is to kind of expand south and then west, which will bring you into conflict with various dwarves, greenskins, the later on either the vampires, the Empire, or Kislev. You can go east. The downside of going east is a lot of other people will be invading that area, and also this is just an annoying area of the game to fight in. You'll be fighting greenskins and ogres, which you do struggle with a little bit early on, but later on in the game, your units will wreck them. Downside, your north is safe. To the south is a rumble pit of everybody wanting to invade that area. You do thankfully have the servants of the Conclave down here to the southeast, which will anchor that area if you choose to go south and then west. The other Chaos Dwarves are located to your south, and we will get to those momentarily. Okay, here we are with Zhatan the Black of this faction, the Gates of Zara faction, Warhost of Zara faction. So this guy's enhancements are he has got more convoys and it's cheaper for him to get artillery and war machine units. So trading war machines. So he's got sorry, that's the wrong guy. That's one of the demonic sorcerers here. That's who I meant to grab. Zhatan the Black has the standard blue line that we just covered with the other guy. So watch that if you want to know how to do it. Suffice to say, healing, units, recruitment, lightning strike, and then that. Anyhow, he is not a magic user. In fact, he is a very powerful fighter. He's got the same red line. He's going to use the red line more than the others because he doesn't need to spend time learning magic. So he has in his unique line combat ability. This guy is a fighter, if you haven't figured that out. Subjugator gets more units, income, and casualties, which is really nice. The Black, he actually has regeneration and a ward save, making him a monster fighter on the battlefield. General of Zar enhances his full army. They heal faster. You can get rank 9 guys with this guy upon recruitment, and they're cheaper to maintain. Haughty resilience, more armor, leadership, melee defense. If you haven't figured out, this guy is pretty much a straightforward army fighter, which is a little odd that it's cheaper for him to recruit war machines and artillery since he has virtually nothing enhancing them. The negative 10 leadership and perfect vigor here makes this guy a monster fighter on the level of Grombrindle, although not as strong. Quite capable of fighting almost full armies by himself. He can also get mounted on a Lamassu, which negates magic weapons and makes him that much stronger at the cost of some of his combat ability. Outside of that, you're probably going to want to go down his red line here. Boundless Cruelty, there we go, will help weaken enemy leadership combined with Laughing Killer. That can be a negative 18 leadership buff from him just wandering around the battlefield fighting. And overall, he's got a standard combat line. Definitely the strongest in melee combat of the Chaos Lords. Is worth, since a lot of his stuff enhances his army, is worth going down the red line to improve his army. Only focus on the ones you're using. Pretty much, I would ignore his trash units, the cannon fodder units. On the other hand, he does enhance them with armor and stuff, so they are slightly better, but by and large, they're still trash, so don't do that. In this Realms of Chaos map, he starts here in the center of the Chaos Dwarves with another one to his east, and then the guy we just showed you to the west. His route of expansion is going west here, fighting the other various dwarves and stuff, similar to the guy up here, Ironhand or whatever. He's pretty good at. The other route, once he takes them out, is he can actually, since he's got the narrowest route of expansion, because this is all Chaos Dwarf land, is actually marching through the Conclave's land once you become allied with them, and going after the dwarves and the ogres to the north. He does need to invade this area to get a couple relics. He's pretty decent at getting the relics, because you can get one over here, and then I think you can get 3 up here, 2 or 3 up there, and then you can always get the others through alliance or allies. Overall, decent starting point. If you look at his legendary building here, though, it will kind of tell you what his focus... Oh, Okay. Huh. I guess I'm crazy. I thought he had a legendary building in his start here. Maybe it's in his other world. Overall, army enhancements, not as focused on cavalry or magic, but he still does a decent job. I recommend for an early start, expand west. Definitely remember to bring along your magic user here. He will help a lot. But overall, probably the most straightforward of the Chaos Dwarf factions to play. He buffs it in it. He does everything you would want from a lord, except for over specialization in one area. On to the Immortal Empires map. Okay, here's Zhatan the Black in Immortal Empires. So honestly, I think this is almost a better starting location for him than the Chaos map. So he starts over here, and it's a little bit hard to see. But basically, here's Cathay. So rather than being crammed with the other Chaos Dwarves, he struck off on his own, and his goal, if you're to look at his victory conditions here, is to basically kill off the Dragon Lady and take the Great Bastion, which he does a decent job at. So he's got ogres, greenskins, and chaos warriors to his west, and early on his job is to kill off this chaos warriors faction, which he can do pretty well. Special mention goes to down here. There's a Cathay faction. Rather than finishing these guys off quickly, you want to take that settlement as soon as you can, because the warriors of Chaos Zeech faction, the changeling guy, is over here, and once he takes it, you kind of don't really want to fight him, but if you take that land first, he'll be your ally, and since he wants to invade Cathay anyway, he tends to get along decently well with you. Going to war with him only helps Cathay. Once you solidify your starting area, you need to expand rapidly. You're going to start running out of supplies. You have to find a way through the Great Bastion, which can be quite hard, but if you move quickly and you bring a strong army, you can break through. Overall, while it is a better starting location for this guy, as in you're not as hemmed in, it's probably a weaker one because you don't have a lot of easy people to fight. Do be aware that if you do need supplies and you can't breach the bastion, you can go around it by fighting ogres, which will get you supplies, and you can underway across some of these areas to break into Cathay from the west, which might actually be easier than going straight through the bastion. Depends how you want to do it. Depends how good you are. But if you can take the capital here before taking the Grand Bastion, the Grand Bastion will fall soon after. Overall, that's his start. Do make sure to get that Cathay settlement before the Changeling gets it. Otherwise, you kind of have to go to war with him because the Chaos Dwarves particularly like to own full regions rather than just part of one. On to the next lord. Okay, here's the last of the main ones, Drazhoath, the action of the Legions of Azgoroth. So this guy starts in the realm of Chaos map at the east of the Chaos Dwarves realm, and his expansion route is almost so obvious I barely feel the need to mention it, but I will. You're fighting ogres here. To the south are greenskins. It's worth killing them off. You can take the Isles here. There is a one of the runes you need out here. Then your route is north into more ogres, Skaven, and if you want to keep going that way is Cathay, but the reality is you want to start going to the west to get the more relics you need to complete your drill. That's pretty much his expansion route here. It's really simple. Technically, you could ally with the other Chaos Dwarves and walk through them, but they'll build their own empires anyway. So this guy's enhancements are armaments cost are reduced for all unit capacity in the Hellforge, and he produces more armaments. So this guy is probably going to have the strongest army out of all the Chaos Dwarves in the sense that he can make sure it's all of elite units. Now, in terms of his actual stats, same blue line, healing, recruitment, final level, cheaper upkeep. Now, he is a mage, unlike the last guy we went over, meaning he's not going to go down the red line as much. He's more into magic. So, Burning Wrath, Dark Subjugation is slightly different here. Really good at breaking enemy leadership and defenses. Actually will make dwarves run away, which is kind of fun. And he does a lot of direct damage as well. His personal enhancements, faster research, faster recruitment, cheaper construction, faster building. We Are Legion. This starts to get into the fun stuff. This is basically, he gets cheaper upkeep for dwarf units in his army, and it's cheaper to build and maintain them, and they're better fighters versus other infantry. more income, more output of raw materials. Master of Hell, his Kadai units are that much stronger. Definitely worth using them on this guy, especially you can build a lot of them. Physical resistance of 15 is no joke. He is Ashen. He starts with a barrier, wound recovery, and hit points. Sadly, he doesn't get regeneration, but he's a mage. Long Years of Exile, the Flames of Asgaroth, which is a pretty strong bombardment spell. He gets cheaper Winds of Magic on them. The only downside I see with this one is that, unlike the Hellhammer of the first Dwarf Lord, this one is a little bit harder to aim, although considerably stronger, but you can discount it pretty well. All told, it's still going to be more expensive than the other Lord's Hellhammer. And up top, he gets to ride on a Bale Taurus with a Cinder Mount, and once you do that, you get a Breath Attack. Overall, his job is not so much to be a single-man army or a single army mage, even though he does have a melee line, which I would avoid for some time. His job is to allow you to get better and more enhanced troops. So if you play it right, he's probably got the stronger faction because of the strongest Chaos Dwarf faction, in the sense that you can enhance more units quicker, easier, and have a larger capacity. On the downside is your individual armies will not be as powerful as the other two Chaos Dwarfs. So Ogres, quick expansion. From there, on to the Immortals map. Okay, here we are on the Immortal Empires map. So, Drazhoath the Ashen starts in a pretty similar location to anybody who's played Tretch Craventail or the Knights of Caledor down here. He starts in the Black Fortress, right on the borders with them, so not surprisingly, his victory conditions are to kill Clan Rictus and the Knights of Caledor, who would be your biggest foes early on. I think this might be one of the harder, slightly more rough of the Chaos Dwarf starts, just because you're right near two major factions. On the other hand, if you can kill them early on, the Chaos Waste is lacking in strong foes in this area. Be aware that you're looking at I always forget. The vampire guy over here expanding, or else the Nurgle faction. You specialize in killing both of them because you have fiery Chaos Dwarves, at which point you can expand into the Ogre realm. In fact, you can go right across that river, or you can keep going west, in which case you can push towards Karak 8 Peaks and everyone else. Relics and stuff are slightly further away than I think they should be for this guy, but you can still expand to get those. And you've got a pretty strong location. Sadly, unless you expand rapidly at the beginning, you can easily get jumped on by the other legendary factions in the area. You want to kill off Caledor and Rictus pretty much as soon as you can, then focus on consolidating your powers. Thankfully, you can expand both east and west. The vampire guy in particular is a good source of labor, which is hilarious because you really shouldn't get labor from vampires, but you can. Going west puts you in conflict with the Clan Moors, various dwarves, and greenskins, but overall, you can contain it because you have very few paths into your land, pretty much 2 of them, and this area is nicely compact, so if you set up all your various bombardments and movements, you can blast anybody. Now, you don't have to worry about going north because the other dwarf factions here Chaos Dwarf factions tend to take over and hold this area. So east, west, south really doesn't get you much because of it's an ocean, but if you really want to, you can go along the coast, fight Tomb Kings, and further south, even the Lizardmen. Biggest danger to watch out for is the vampires arriving before you're ready for them, or failing to easily win one of your initial starting wars. But I do like the location. You're pretty much safe in your starting province to the east. To the west is your threats. To the south is not the biggest threats, just an annoying ogre. Make sure you wipe out the ogre raiding camps. They're just a pain. And if the ogres raid your land, you're looking at more slave revolts. Overall, it was a decent start when I played with this guy. So, that is actually it for the entire guide. Boy, we're looking at like 2.5 hours. Anyhow, hopefully you've enjoyed that. Hopefully I've explained them more. Hopefully you've also liked, subscribed, commented, told other people about it. And check out my other Total Warhammer 3 guides if you haven't seen them. And feedback and everything, of course, is appreciated. If you got any great strategies or tricks, leave them below. And if you'd like to see any other guides or stuff done, let me know in the comments. And I will be starting a Chaos Dwarf Let's Play as Zhatan the Black in Immortal Empires, which means I'll be invading Cathay pretty soon. So see you guys all then, or in another guide or Let's Play. Bye for now.